traveler arrived in our system, changing Earth and humanity for the better. This dawn is known as the Golden Age, which is now lost to us, buried in the remains of the greatest cataclysm humanity has ever known, the collapse. Civilization as we knew was destroyed, and with it, knowledge of our past, as well as the foundations to build knowledge of our future. These logs will attempt to make up for that shortfall. They will attempt to make the most of the knowledge we have of our destiny.
Dostrzeć.
Upon the traveler's arrival, there were dynamic changes to the world that we know. Worlds such as Venus and Mars were terraformed and made hospitable. Crews were eventually dispatched and the planets were colonized. But these were no ordinary humans. The traveler changed us fundamentally, and allowed us to live for longer than 300 years in some cases. The acceleration of human lifespan, the incredible technology that we unlocked, and the foundations of science that had been built by corporations such as Clovis Bray helped to spread humanity across the solar system. Truly, it is described as a time of miracles. Humanity began to expand from our closest reaches, such as our own moon, to the outer rim, where we would colonize the moons of Saturn and Jupiter, even reaching as far as Uranus and Pluto. There is no limit to what humanity could have accomplished had the Golden Age remained. But sadly, the traveler brings with it a dark presence, not necessarily born of its own light, but merely something that follows, a presence of all-consuming hate, hunger, and darkness. This foe caused the collapse, unknown, unseeable, yet always there. As darkness began to claim our world, so did other new alien races, enemies that we would come to know and fight on the battlefield, hundreds of years later after the collapse had been stopped, and our city had finally stood the test of time. The years after the collapse were hard. Some humans managed to survive in the wild, in small towns and settlements like the famous town of Palomar, but most fled to the city. The last safe city on Earth, the place where the traveler had decided to stop, the place where it had fought its final battle with darkness. Records of such have all been lost. The darkness that you fight now is subdued. The traveler sacrificed itself to attempt to stop it. But ultimately, the darkness is returning, and the armies that we see marching at our gates are simply a sign of this. They know 4 names. The Fallen, a once noble and proud race of scavengers and pirates. These arachnids divide themselves into ruling houses, such as the House of Devils, House of Wolves, and House of Winter. These are ferocious adversaries and have risen to attack the city many times. Their adaptable physiology means that they can be found on almost every single planet in our solar system, whether it's the dusty dunes of Mars, where they occupy places such as Olympus Mons, controlled by the House of Kings, or whether it's our own Earth, where they hunt in the Cosmodrome, searching for wreckage and war mines beneath the surface. The Hive, a force of darkness so utterly riddled with fear and hatred that it seeps from their bones. Their technology is often seen as more akin to magic. The Hive use decaying forces such as their thralls and ogres to strike out at enemies that are close, and use their wizards and their terrible rituals in order to harm enemies from afar. During the collapse, these were the enemies that claimed our moon. These were the ones that slaughtered those of our first colony, and they will pay dearly when they burn in our light. The Vex, timeless machines, left with nothing more but hatred. They are truly dark, but they are also mysterious. We simply know that the Vex can bend time. The Vex do not simply fight us on a physical plane. They fight to eradicate our very existence. They fight by twisting time itself. And in places such as the Vault of Glass, they have perfected this terrifying action. and can even erase Guardians from existence. And the Cabal, a militaristic society driven by the orders of their emperor, guided at heart by secret darkness, something that tears away at them. Their massive arms and armaments will ultimately be brought to bear against the city, and even our guns and defenses will be tested that day, for the Cabal are a mighty adversary, one that must always be treated with respect. These are the foes that have occupied our worlds. The collapse gave them ground to grow. But there is one that may have had some experience of this before. For our cataclysm was known as the collapse. Theirs was known as the whirlwind. Join me next time, when we'll be discovering the origin.
Have you ever heard of 1-800-GOT-JUNK?
Oh yeah, the junk removal company.
Traveler arrived in our system, changing Earth's civilization. They will attempt to make the most of the knowledge we have of our destiny. In the time before time, there were two. One of light, and one of terrible darkness. And from that darkness crawled a name, an omen. The one who sits on the Osmium throne. Oryx, the Taken King. One of the greatest gods of the Hive Pantheon, a ruler of the Swarm. When the Hive arrived at Sol and created the collapse of mankind, his brood began to grow. It was subtle at first, like the darkness of twilight. His brood burrowed into our worlds. Silently his forces massed and grew, and suddenly they struck. Whilst Oryx commanded his armies from the darkness at the edge of our solar system, amongst his brood a Hive champion of unthinkable power conquered all. His name was Crota the Light Eater, Oryx's son. It was Crota whose brood seized our moon and later butchered the greatest army of Guardians in history. Amongst those that fled the disaster at Mare Ebrium was a hunter. Her name, Eris Morn. Sworn to an organization known as the Hidden, she sought revenge against Crota for those she had lost. She led an assault on Crota's fortress deep into the moon, with the aid of the exiled warlock, Toland, the Shattered One. She failed. Her ghost was destroyed, and her sight was taken. Eris survived in the depths of the Hellmouth for years, clawing her sight back from the eyes of an acolyte. Without her ghost, she was helpless if attacked, and so she hid, using the darkness that surrounded her to hide herself from her oppressors. But the darkness and prolonged exposure to the Hive left her marked, and some would say enlightened. When she felt the darkness of Crota return, she fled back to the city to warn the Guardians of the encroaching attack. With her guidance and visions, the Guardians of the last safe city on Earth stopped Crota from finding his corporeal form in this world. At her request, and to avenge those that she had lost, 6 Guardians ventured down into the Hellmouth, into the very pit, into the very core. Crossing dimensions through the keyhole between realities, they entered Crota's netherworld, and with their might, skill, wisdom, and from the knowledge that Eris had learned from Toland, the Guardians found Crota and ended him. For but a moment the Guardians and Eris celebrated, and the city was safe once again. But this peace was far too short-lived. For in his dying breath, as the crux of his soul was fed to the Eidolon ally, Crota reached out across the night, sending ripples of cosmic energy through the void. His death echoed across the night and was felt by all of the Pantheon of the Hive. Oryx's son had been slain. Not only could all those connected to the void feel this, but so could Crota's father. The ruler of the Osmian throne felt the pain of his son's final words, and he swore that he would have vengeance. But the death of Crota was noticed by more than simply his father. The mysterious organization known as the Nine took notice as well. Regardless of their intentions, their next actions would be of great importance. Previously, the Nine had had dealings with the Queen of the Reef, Mara Sol. She had offered them the former Kell of the House of Wolves, Skolas the Rabid, in exchange for the return of some of the Reef's valuable crows. They had accepted the offer. However, when they felt the coming return of Oryx, they set in motion a sequence of events that would spell disaster for the Reef. The Nine released Skolas and gave him a catch, effectively starting the Great Rebellion of the House of Wolves. Whilst this sowed chaos amongst the ranks of the Awoken of the Reef, it also had the effect of forcing the Queen's hand. She knew her own forces mightn't be enough to capture Skolas, so she opened the Reef to the Guardians of the last safe city on Earth, forcing her to strengthen the ties between the two groups. This, combined with the capture and killing of the traitor Kell Skolas, brought a new age of cooperation between the Guardians of Earth and the Reef-born Awoken. Humanity and their cousins from the Reef were finally sitting alongside, working in tandem, if an uneasy one. It was now that the new threat presented itself. In the darkness of the night, Eris knew that the threat would face the tower. With the new cooperation between the tower and the Reef, she traveled to seek an audience with the Queen. When she knelt before the Queen, she said this: "Before we begin, I will say this. Your Grace, I am not here for you. I have no wish to play politics. I have no grievance with the city. Not anymore. I have no grand hopes to end the war. For long I have known I will not see its end. I am here for one battle, and one alone, because it is a battle that we must all fight, together or separately. I will do anything to end Oryx." With the silence of what Eris had said falling upon the room, the Queen's response was simple and clear. "Well said. So let us end him." Oryx's fleet arrived at the edge of our solar system. With him he brought the might of the Hive armies, a millennia-old dreadnought, and his undying, unfaltering desire for vengeance. He conspired to take the warring armies of the Sol system and turn them against one another. From these forces he would build his taken army, binding their souls to his will. When he began to pass through the rings of the planet Saturn, the awoken forces of the Reef descended upon his dreadnought and the rest of his fleet. It was with this battle, above the windy surface of Saturn, that the armies of monarchs clashed through the void and on the physical plane. It was through this battle that Oryx would announce to the solar system that he had come to seek vengeance against all those that occupied this land of light and hope. It was through this battle that he would crush the throne beneath the Howling Dark and proclaim the might of the Osmian dynasty. It was with this battle through which the Taken War had begun. Join me next time. Oryx, the greatest shadow that Sol had known since the collapse, was gone. He was forced to retreat back into the Ascendant Realm by the Guardian that defeated his son. This Guardian was the same that would eventually spell his doom. There are some who would state that this is all we can hope to attain. Win the battle, come home, and move on to face the next adversary. But there are others who would remind us of the importance of these events. After all, the Taken King's defeat is pointless if we do not understand why he sought to drive us to the edge of extinction in the first place. What drove this god? Was it malice? Was it vengeance? Can we even hope to contemplate the vast logic of a god? Or is it tangible in another perspective, one that we simply cannot see until we are shown? One that we simply cannot see until we are shown. What secrets did he uncover? What sadness has he known? And could things have been different in another reality? Perhaps things are left to us to decide, perhaps not. Perhaps even Oryx's story is written in the stars, millions of years ago. Whatever the case, this is the tale of the Osmium dynasty. Its origins, its ruler, and a choice that would shape the fate of time and history. It all started billions of years ago, on a distant world shadowed in cloud and storms. A vast world known as Fundament. A gas giant hiding a vast ocean in depths of swirling misty fog. A place teeming with life, much of which came from impacts that occurred with other planets. Such was the size of Fundament. But this world of 52 moons and a vast surface held a dark secret at its core. This darkness would call out to the smallest of the world's races, a people of beings known as the Krill. They were humanoid, had 3 eyes, and were divided into warring nations. One of these was that of the Osmium Kingdoms. Their king had recently turned 10, a long and prosperous life by the Krill standards, which had turned him to madness. He would observe the movements of the planets and moons day by day, night by night, waiting for a sign. His 3 daughters, Zyro, Sathona, and Ulrash, were watched by one of the great mothers of the court, Teox. Zyro was the bravest of the 3. She wished to grow into a knight and to conquer the Helium Drinkers, another of the splintered groups of Krill that had made Fundament their home. Sathona, who was the wisest, wished to become a mother, so that she could live a long life and make a difference for her people. And Ulrash. Ulrash was the eldest. She wished simply to understand. Her thirst for knowledge and understanding would put her closest to her father, but even their bond was not strong enough to prevent his madness. One day he would be observing the moons and speaking of Cataclysm, the next he would be wandering the halls of the Osmium court, tending to the dead worm that acted as his familiar. The Osmium dynasty was already in peril. The Helium Drinkers raided their territory on a regular basis, and the time would soon come for a new leader to be chosen from the Osmium King's 3 daughters. It was in this moment of desperation that Teox acted. She believed that none of the king's daughters were ready to lead the Osmium court, and so, to save the dynasty, she wrote in secret to the Helium Drinkers. She told them to invade, and to slay the king. She would dispatch Sathona, Zyro, and Ulrash, so that she might rule as the Helium's regent. The betrayal was sudden and brutal. the king was murdered in front of his offspring. Before they too were destroyed, the three sisters fled. Sathona grabbed her father's familiar. Zyro's courage gave them strength to act, and Ulrush heard the last warning of her father, who screamed of a doom that must be understood, lest it bring ruin to all Fundament. They escaped onto Fundament's vast, tyrannical ocean with a ship stolen from their home. It was here that they swore a pledge. Ulrush bound her sisters to action, sealing their pact with blood from each sister. They each took a knife in their right hand and stabbed their left into the same mast, making a streak of blood to seal their pact. They swore that they would have vengeance. They swore for many reasons. Zyro to slay Teox, the treacherous mother. Sathona to become mother, and to raise her young from the corpses of their enemies. Ulrush to understand her father's final warning, and to save her people from the disaster that surely awaited them. But they all swore that they would return home soon, to reclaim the Osmium throne. After the oath was done, Ulrush retreated to her chambers to inscribe her thoughts. It is here that she realized her father's greatest fear, and it is here that it became her own. In his dying moments, he had screamed, "Ulrush, my first daughter, the moons are different, the laws are bent." He then made the sign of Aziziji. It is only now that Ulrush realized the doom that awaited them. Aziziji of the 52 moons of Fundament would pull the water below on the surface of Fundament into a massive bulge. When the Ziziji, the alignment of all 52 moons, passed, the water would be released.
If your pet goes from drooly...
Be released, creating a global tsunami, a god wave. This was the doom of the tides that her father had feared. This was the fate of her people. In fear, she was paralyzed. And as Zyro comforted Ulrush, Sathona had begun to grow cunning to the point of inexplicable good luck. In fact, there was no luck. The uncanny luck that she supposedly had was born of her father's familiar, the white worm that had washed up from the sea so many years ago, dead for all purposes but one. Sathona too heard the whispers that her father had. The familiar was guiding her, keeping her secrets, keeping her and her sisters alive. It was this familiar, this dead thing, which filled her head with delusions of grandeur, that led them to the Needle. An ancient ship, clearly not of the world of Fundament. Zyro wanted to sell the ship at Kahan Atoll, where the species of Fundament gathered. It would buy them the mercenaries that they needed to retake their throne, but Sathona said it was worthless. Instead, Ulrush said that they should enter the ship and repair it. This was in accordance with the Familiar's plan, and so Sathona agreed. Inside the ship they found a dead crew, and an egg that they could not recognize that had hatched. It was clear that the crew had found their terrible fate in the depths of Fundament, but still Sathona and her sisters repaired the ship. For 2 years they went on, learnt and traveled in the Needle, until one day Sathona told them of the great truth that plagued her. She feared that they would never fulfill their oath, and that they would die of old age before they ever tasted the revenge that they had sworn to seek. To this, Ulrush knew only one response. She told them to dive. Zyro protested, but Sathona uttered that which her familiar had told her. dive would bring them closer to the solution. It would bring them to the deep core of Fundament. It would buy them the time that they needed. So they dove deep into the harsh core of Fundament, below its waves and oceans, beneath its shifting tectonics. And in the darkness, they found answers. Past monsters of great scope and crushing pressure from the oceans, they found a place of silence. It was here that they first listened for answers. It was here that an answer found them. They felt the raging nature of Fundament and could hear the moons tugging on the oceans above. Zathona hissed, "The ZZG is real." And remembering the deaths of those that they had first found in the ship, Zyro whispered, "There's something down here. Something secret." Suddenly, there was a voice. A great booming voice as terrifying as the God Wave itself. A voice that echoed inside the ship and inside the heads of the sisters. Above them, it appeared. The Leviathan. A creature as ancient as the world, more massive than description can portray. Its brows greater than the continents of Orash's childhood. Its great fins crackling with the lightning of life. The great beast turned to them, and it spoke.
You must turn back. Save yourselves from the deep. Save the world from yourselves. You must turn back. We live on the edge of war. A war between formless and form. Between the deep and the sky. My eyes are wide. My gaze is long. Across the universe, as far as I see, the sky works to charge its fires, and the deep drowns the ash. Sky builds gentle places safe for life. Beloved Fundament, refuge of trillions. The sky treasures this rich place, but the deep is here with us. Cold logic tests our walls. The deep claims its dominion, a ruthless final age.
We can live very rural, and yet
Orash summoned the courage to reply. "We live short, hard lives. The storm above us never ends, and soon the God Wave will take us all. Above us there are only monsters and moons of apocalypse. Let us go down, down where we may discover truth. Some power to avenge ourselves upon our betrayers, some hope of survival." The Leviathan reached out into Orash's mind and gave a response. This was now a debate.
What power calls you down to the deep? What instinct draws you away from high hope? Quick-breeding krill people, I tell you, for eons I have watched your struggle, clinging to the sharp edge of survival, balanced between the deep and the sky. You were my treasure, my proof against despair, for this is the deep claim. Existence is the struggle to exist. When the struggle seems lost, when the safe places crumble, everything turns to the deep to survive. I reject the deep claim. You will turn back, sweet krill of hope. You will choose the sky instead.
This time it was Zyro's turn to respond. "You are huge and old. Our lives are short and desperate. If that is the way the world is supposed to be, I won't have it. If people like Teox are supposed to win, I won't let them. I'll beat the world until it changes. I'll kill anything in the way." To this, the Leviathan responded, realizing that his greatest terrors and fears were soon to be realized.
This fatal logic. Hear my monopole scream. It will consume you. Before you lies the worship of death, the ruinous path. The sky builds new life against the onset of ruin, towards a gentle world. The deep embraces death. Saying this is inevitable and right. I exist as hungry ruin. Turn back from the world-killing way, or you will live as death and devastation. The sky is the harder way, but it is kinder. My charge is balanced, my voice exhausted.
With her cunning mind corrupted by the words of the familiar, Sathona gave her final reply to the Leviathan's dirge. Sisters, I have my father's familiar. Look, it answers me in plain words. It helps me find this ship. It gives me strength when hope is lost. Who will you trust? The voice that wants us to live and suffer as we have lived and suffered? The Leviathan that offers no hope against Teox or the World Wave? Or the plain, honest worm? Let us see where its whisper leads us, O Rush. Let us go deeper, Zyro. Let us dive, O sisters mine. So the siblings ignored the Leviathan's warnings and continued downwards. They went down and down and down, and finally they reached the core of Fundament. In this deep darkness of the innermost reaches of the planet, they found their fate. What happened next would spell doom for all those on the world above. Orash saw something and stepped out onto the hull of their ship. She should have been crushed by the pressure of the water and all of the weight of the world above her. She should have burnt in the fiery center of the earth. And yet, she was alive. And then, she saw them. The worms. 5 of them, massive and imposing. These dragons were of the same species that we would come to call Ahamkara. The worms that made promises, the worms that promised power. But these worms were different. Unlike their enigmatic and independent cousins, these Ahamkara were bound to a power greater than their own will. The power of the deep. The darkness itself. One of the monsters addressed Orash, making her an offer that would change the fate of untold hundreds of trillions across the universe. You are Orash, heir to the Osmium throne. I am Yul, the honest worm. Behold Aya and Zol and and Aka, the virtuous worms. Look upon us, and know that we are good. For millions of years we have been trapped in the deep. From across the stars we called life to Fundament, so that it might contend against extinction. For millennia we have awaited you, our beloved hosts. We want to help you, Princess. We offer to each of you a bargain, a symbiosis. Take into your bodies our children, our newborn larvae. From them you shall obtain eternal life. From them you shall gain power over your own fragile flesh, the power to make it as you will. And should you find an imperfection in the world, an injustice or an inconvenience, you will have the power to repair it. Let no mere law bind you. We ask one thing in exchange, O Princess. You must obey your nature forever. In your immortality, Orash, you may never cease to explore and inquire for the sake of your children. In your immortality, Zyro, you may never cease to test your strength. In your immortality, Sathona, you may never abandon cunning. If you do, your worm will consume you. And as your power grows, O princes, so will your worm's appetite. But we offer eternity, O Rush. We offer you a chance at the universe. Would you deny your people infinity? Reach up to me. Let my flesh be your sacrament. And so it was. Our Rush, Sathona, and Zyro accepted the worms. In doing so, they chose to take new forms and new names. Sathona chose the Mother Morph and became Savathun. Zyro chose the Night Morph and became Xivu Arath. And Ulrash chose the King Morph and became Aurix. And so it was. Two pacts that changed Fundament, and the Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. So, this is the first episode of Extra Lore, and this is really happening because all of you guys, you gave an incredible response to the one lore video that I made. And yes, that's definitely a series that I'm going to continue, there is no question in my mind. However, Extra Lore is designed as kind of a companion series to it almost. So, whilst we do have them to you, because, you know, now we actually have the full picture of the fighting of 3 that went in there, then yeah, it just means we get stories out there, which can actually be told in really great depth, with some seriously cool art with them. And yeah, I feel as though those stories deserve to come to light. However, these certain lore elements, some of them just, you know, they can't be given their own storyboards, because there's a lot of gaps that we need to fill in, some of the stories are disjointed, some of them aren't stories at all, some of it's just collections of facts that are relevant to it, some of it's unclear or even theoretical. System, so when did they get to... And then I'm going to talk about that Worm Gods topic, and really that last one is only because so many people requested it, but there is still a lot of interesting stuff in between. So, let's talk history. Now, there is a bunch of ancient history stuff with the Ahamkara which can be looked at and seen in the Book of Sorrows. However, if you go and simply examine their history and soul on its own, there is a really fascinating story to tell anyway, because the Ahamkara have had a very interesting relationship with the city. They were apparently appearing around about the same time as the Traveller, and it's not necessarily clear whether the Traveller created them or whether they arrived with it, and I'm inclined to say the latter, but maybe you'll find out why a bit later. However, at a certain point after the collapse, the Ahamkara was still alive, and it was at this point that they started making dealings for power with the city. And this is kind of one of the main traits of the Ahamkara that you see. They're creatures that love to bargain, they love to make deals, and they love to trade. And it's not necessarily trades that will reveal themselves as, say, immediately valuable. It's not like you're buying something from a merchant here. The Ahamkara, more often than not, don't even deal in material goods. More often than not, it's knowledge or power. So this is a big reason why warlocks in particular appear to be drawn to the Ahamkara. There's a lot of different times at which warlocks are criticized, such as Osiris himself, who chase knowledge of the Vex, of the Hive, Thanatonautics, etc., all of these kind of outlawed practices. So Ahamkara skate in this very sort of edgy zone of the city's lore, the city's history, and they're not really seen as part of the mainstream Guardians' typical set of allies. You know, these are very much frontiermen. So, there was most certainly power that was gained from the deals with the Ahamkara, but at a certain point the consensus, which is the body that rules the city as well as the tower, eventually just said, no, this isn't good enough. So, the Ahamkara were ordered to become extinct, and this initiated what is known as the Great Hunt. This is where Guardians hunted down the Ahamkara and literally drove them to the edge of extinction. So dangerous were they. Now, it's not entirely clear at first glance why they're so dangerous, but I'm going to get into that in a little bit. If you take a look at the Great Hunt and what happens with it though, the history of the Great Hunt in that Grimoire card is actually told possibly from the perspective of an Ahamkara.
How can you tell? Well, it does talk about all the Ahamkara being extinct, but it also ends with a very interesting sentence. O reader mine. That's how it often goes. And in so many pieces of exotic armor that happen to have Ahamkara in them, you have that O noun mine ending to it. So for example, if you go ahead and take a look at something like, say, the dire Ahamkara skull, it's got words to the effect of reality is the finest flesh, O bearer mine. I believe that's it, at least. The point is, you always have this O something mine ending to everything that the Ahamkara do, and you can very clearly tell where someone is being influenced by the Ahamkara or where they're speaking from this. So all of a sudden, you have a whole bunch of questions left over, but the only thing you can find in the Ahamkara remains nothing more than just bones. Bones more often, sometimes scales, but nothing living. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Where are the actual live Ahamkara, if they still exist? And if they do, how is it that they can somehow still influence us? This is kind of what I'd like to talk about when I shift onto the general side of Ahamkara, and talking about knowledge that we have of them. This kind of O reader mine, O bearer mine, whatever presence they have in the Grimoire cards, it shows something terrifying, which is this kind of latent psionic ability. And when I say that, that's a very loaded sentence and it's got a lot of jargon in there, so let me explain what I mean. When I say latent psionic, it's essentially a way of saying they are hiding, or within them, somewhere that they may not even necessarily know, there is the ability to exert power over other people's minds using their own. And that is a terrifyingly strong ability. Now, this isn't necessarily the same as something like, say, how a warlock or how a titan or a hunter manipulates light. It's not even the same as, well, not necessarily the same as the way the darkness manipulates its power. This is totally separate. This is its own form of control. And the one place you can see this so clearly is where it influences the minds and emotions of people that have been around their bones. You can see this in particular in the Grimoire card Warlock 1, where there is a warlock who is talking to a hunter he knows, and at a certain point he is holding the claws of an Ahamkara, and, you know, this basically drives him to hubris and pride and irritation with the hunter, who essentially isn't listening to him as he's trying to explain the story of the Ahamkara. And of course this is a very typical dialogue of warlock and hunter, but at the end he says to her, you couldn't have brought one of these down, there's no way you could have hunted one of these things. And she essentially says, oh, is that so? Okay, I accept the challenge. And then she goes off, and meanwhile to himself the warlock is thinking, why did I do that? Why did I, you know, throw myself into that particular conflict? What drove me to such pride is the exact wording there. I actually did an audio grimoire card of this for Guardian Radio, which I'll link in the description for you guys if you're interested. If you're also, yeah, I don't know, it's more of me doing nerdy voice acting, so go for it if you're super into that, I guess.
Free Skechers Work Slip-ins have an invisible built-in shoehorn, so your foot slides into place without touching your shoe. Skechers Work Slip-ins.
Tools from Harbor Freight are doing hard work in real garages across America. Like at Nico's Automotive Shop in Des Plaines, Illinois, where his Daytona Jack does all the heavy lifting. His Hercules impact wrench makes quick work of tough jobs. And his Icon torque wrench keeps every bolt honest. Nico demands affordable tools that don't quit, because he never quits until the job's done. Harbor Freight, built for tool people like me.
Either way, what is important about this isn't just the fact that this is probably why the city deemed the Ahamkara too deadly to keep alive, but also it gives us a really important insight into the nature of the universe of Destiny. And I mean that on the most fundamental level. Because if the Ahamkara are able to tap into their psionic power somehow, it could confirm the existence of some kind of space and force other than the light or dark. And this is getting super theoretical on all sorts of senses, but for me, I think personally that it sort of confirms this idea of a psychomutable plane of existence. And again, super loaded words. Basically what that means is it's kind of a parallel universe, except instead of this one being edited by physical objects, so for example now I don't know if you can hear me in the background, but I'm clicking my mouse. I don't know, maybe that's a thing you can hear. Point is, theoretically, if this place does exist, instead of us being able to change it with physical actions, we'd be able to change it with the power of our minds and with our own force of will. This is a really exciting thing, and if you want me to do an extra lore episodes on my thoughts of this, this relates to the Hive Ascendant Plane, the Vex, and their time gate system, but totally off topic, so moving on. Yeah, this is just a really cool thing, because you can then take a look at the Ahamkara and say, well, how powerful are these beings? What could they potentially be? Well, it's clear from the Book of Sorrows, if you're looking at the particular area which has the Worm God segment to it, and even later on, assuming that we do take them to be Ahamkara, that Ahamkara can live for millions and millions of years if given the right kind of, stimulus. So maybe that is driven by the darkness, but regardless, they can become ancient. In reality, maybe they're the size of about a horse when they're dire, and when they're young, maybe you think of them as a little bigger than a feline or a canine. So, definitely sizable. In fact, it's kind of nice because they almost become personally sized for humans, but in the case of the Book of Sorrows, it does describe them as being massive and having humongous bodies, to the point of the fact that they're literally nurturing life on their bodies, so you'd expect, crustaceans and small kind of parasites living in their skin or something. That kind of indicates a massive size, so we don't know how big these Ahamkara can grow, but there is an exciting amount of potential there. I'm really thrilled to see what happens with Ahamkara in the future as a result. Okay, so finally, let's go ahead and very simply talk about the Worm Gods. Are they Ahamkara? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. There was a lot of contention about this in the comments section on the video, some people saying that it's just a fan theory and other people disagreeing. However, for those of you that do disagree with the idea that they are Worm Gods, I simply want to put some evidence towards you guys. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, but in my mind this is pretty determinant. So, first of all, take a look at anything that involves Ahamkara, whether it's grimoire cards or exotics. You always have the O noun mine ending, O reader mine, O bearer mine, O general mine. Now, this clearly indicates the presence of either an Ahamkara itself or an Ahamkara's bones, or, well, I suppose by that extension you could say the remains of an Ahamkara. So, if you have that in mind, think all the way back to when Sathona, and of course Orash and Zyro, were having the conversation with the Leviathan. After he's given his final few words, she parts away saying that yes, we're going to go down, we're going to dive. She says at the very end of the sentence, "Oh, sisters mine. Let us see where its whisper leads us, Orash. Let us go deeper, Zyro. Let us dive, O sisters mine." Now, this is very clearly the same kind of principle, the O noun mine ending, which indicates the presence of an Ahamkara. So, take that into account. Also, what was she holding at the time being? She was specifically talking about the dead worm, the familiar. This is a really clear link, not just simply because of the fact that yes, you have that O noun mine ending, which indicates that what she was holding was indeed the remains of an Ahamkara, but also because if you think about it, it's very clearly been washed up from the deep with that exact purpose. Now, go back and think, well, okay, sure, maybe she was holding the remains of an Ahamkara, but that doesn't necessarily mean the Worm Gods themselves are. No, it doesn't. It's very much a clear link that you can draw, and it's all but confirmed that they are, but then you simply have to then look at one of the later grimoire cards, where the Worm Gods themselves are talking to Xivu Arath, and then you see that final sentence, "O general mine, reality is the finest flesh," literally quoting the dire Ahamkara's skull there, and of course, O general animals, O general mine, etc. You have that very clear link. Not only this, but there's a lot of contention simply because the Ahamkara are described as Worm Gods, not Worm with a Y, but Worm with an O. Here's the thing, guys, it's a problem of perception. When you look at a worm and when you look at a dragon, you think of two very different things, but you've got to remember, this is alien biology and no one has actually ever seen a live Ahamkara. So it's entirely possible that they could look completely different from what we imagine, and it's totally plausible as well that you could use both the words dragon and worm to describe them. For example, it talks in one of the grimoire cards where they're making the bargain about the great coiled length of the Ahamkara, the great coiled length of the Worm Gods, I suppose, if you're going to put it that way, but it also talks about their folded wings. Wings. That is a very, very specific trait to mention. Now, first of all, you've got to remember that dragons come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You have ones that breathe ice, you have ones that come from China and have much longer coiled bodies, you have the traditional Western ones, but all of them, no matter what, have wings. It is the one common feature between every single dragon. Plus, then you simply have to look at a further point that could be made. Let's say that you still don't buy it and you're still one of the guys that's holding to the idea that because it says worm with an O, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are dragons, they are worms of some kind.
Tough headaches got you down?
Well, let's go ahead and take a look at our own history if we are going to go ahead and talk about why it's entirely possible that this stuff doesn't matter. If you're going to go all the way back with them to the exact spelling of the word, then you have a problem as well. Take a look at something like, say, Fox's Book of Martyrs. This is something that I'm sure none of you know about, but it's a text from the 17th, 16th century, and Fox in those days is spelled entirely different from Fox in our time. In our time, it's F-O-X, very simple. In their time, back in the 16th and 17th century, there is no established spelling of Fox, which means they spell it F-O-X-E. You see all of a sudden that when you go into history and all of its different divergent parts, spelling doesn't necessarily matter as much. You have people spelling the name of a king differently in the same time period at multiple points. Cross this over to Destiny, and remember that the Book of Sorrows is written entirely from the perspective of the Hive themselves. For the Hive, it may be the case that our translations are exceptionally rough. After all, the Book of Sorrows, again, is something that's written from their perspective. And you could run into that exact same translation problem. So with that, think of some things phonetically. Look at worm with an O and think of worm with a Y equally as possible. Keep your mind open to those possibilities. And finally, guys, I'd like to simply invoke Occam's razor on this one. And this is kind of an interesting principle which essentially states that the simplest answer to something is more often than not the correct one. When all of a sudden you have to go through all sorts of convoluted hoops and whatnot in order to prove the worm gods aren't Ahamkara, you have to really boil the theory into a whole weird contraption that it shouldn't really be. It makes a lot more sense for them to simply be Ahamkara. There are indications in the law, and if you're overlooking one word and simply allowing yourself to imagine for a second if a dragon could also look like a worm, then, well, suddenly it doesn't matter as much. So, yeah, that's my theory on it. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, but frankly, I am firmly standing by the idea that the worm gods are Ahamkara, and I don't think it's just a fan theory. I think it's actually what they are. It makes the most sense. Frankly, there is no reason in my mind that I can see why they wouldn't be. Finally, let's look at the very end of the Book of Sorrows. This is really, really late and far down our story, and I was kind of hesitant to jump into this, but seeing as so many people asked, I'm going to just throw this in there now. Take a look at the Grimoire card, where Zivu Arath is describing a conflict that they are having with the Harmony, a race that has come to contact, I believe, with Ahamkara. And the reason why I believe this is a linkable thing, and why the worm gods are also dragon-like, is simply because of this final sentence. The dragons, I'd shot them all in cells, our gods should be ours alone, their smug freedom is an insult. You know, sentences like these really do give us an indication that, yeah, the worm gods do look like dragons, and the only kind of dragons we know of in this universe are Ahamkara. So yeah, there's more than enough clues in here for us to basically say that yeah, there's a mountain of evidence stating that they are, and honestly, not much stating that they aren't. Essentially, you're hanging on to the spelling of something and saying it might not be, which I get, I really do. Skepticism is a strong theory, and more often than not it's correct. In this instance, however, you do have to remember that some things just aren't coincidences. When enough things work together and make sense, you've simply got to assume that they're all part of the same organism, or the same mechanism, call it what you will. Point is, if you have enough clues that you can connect the dots, the likelihood is that whatever you're leading yourself to is going to be true. So, yeah, that's my simple theory. I'm putting it out there. That's what I believe on the Ahamkara. So, yeah, if you agree with me or disagree with me, feel free to go ahead and say that in the comment section below. Again, academic pursuit here, guys. If you disagree, go ahead and give reasons why, because, again, I am not necessarily correct. I am using reason here, but at the same time, my reasoning could absolutely be incorrect. So, yeah, if you think you have a better idea or a better theory, let me know so we can all discover the truth. But in the meantime, I hope you guys really did enjoy this episode of Extra Lore. I'm going to try and shorten out these episodes for sure. Greetings, Guardians, my name is Byfear. Welcome back to Extra Lore. In this episode, I basically nice little kind of overview of the history of the city. So, if you want to know where the factions actually originated, you need to go all the way back to the very beginning. And when I say the very beginning, I mean the beginning of the city, not talking about the very beginning of time. Let's go ahead and actually look at humanity after the final battle between the Darkness and the Traveler, where the Traveler is wounded. Eventually, you have some very important events happening in this very early stage of time for the city. You've got the rise of the Titan Orders of the Pilgrim Guard and the Stoneborn. They start to build the first walls of the city, and they start to shepherd people to the Traveler. And all of a sudden, you have this mass of people. Now, here's the thing. Whilst the Guardians most certainly were respected, and whilst they were very powerful individuals in the early city, there wasn't really much that they could do. You see, they're an individual against a mass of people. You have to realize that as powerful as a Titan or a Hunter is, there's no question that 1,000 people, 100 people even, no matter how large the number is or how small it may be, all of a sudden they get lost in that crowd. And you also have to remember the state of the last safe city on Earth at this point. There are very few foundations in place. People are probably struggling to find food and water effectively. The only real guarantee of safety that they have is the Traveler's shields and the first few walls that have ever been erected by the Titans. And those walls are probably paper thin. Nothing more than stone, maybe a few ramparts, barricades, some weapon installations that have been mocked up. Behind the walls lies probably the largest remaining human populace in the solar system. These people are terrified, and quite rightly so, but at the same time, you have to remember that this kind of atmosphere of fear does breed leadership. It breeds opportunity, and this is really where the first factions came from. You can imagine that most of their leaders probably started out in kind of a similar way to a lot of people in tribal societies. They would be the ones who rose to the top, but these people, of course, they're trying to bind individuals together. They're trying to find food and water, maybe ensure that the defenses get held up, maybe ensure that people are being cared for. After all, that's the responsibility of most leaders nowadays. However, this is the starting point of huge divisions in the city, because whilst all the people under that particular banner of the last safe city do care about each other, they have different ideas about how they should be doing so. And this is where the huge internal divisions of the city really start to form. There are those that believe that we should simply hide inside the safe city and wait until the madness stops. There are those that believe we should immediately start to retake everything of our solar system. There are those that believe that we should go to war and mobilize everyone. There are those that believe we should simply leave the solar system altogether. And from these conflicts, the very earliest of ideologies start to grow. This started to bring conflict, and given the fact that the city had no formal organization at this point aside from the Guardians manning their walls, and maybe a few individual citizens who'd taken up arms beside them who would have represented the very earliest forces of the FOTC, well, let's put it this way, there wasn't really too much authority aside from these individuals who'd risen to power, and from their disagreements and ideology, war quickly sparked. The faction wars were supposed to be terrible. Eventually they grew to a point where Guardians had to subdue the populace, and a new structure for the city was built. The factions were so popular now that there was no way the Guardians could stop people from joining them, so the factions had to be forced to work together. The power of the Guardians had to be made clear. Nobody was going to cross them. They were the ones that had saved the citizens of the last safe city, but they also had to respect the individual citizens that had wound their way up there. So the solution was elegant and hopefully something that would last, and it turns out it did. The formation of a consensus was made, a consensus that would answer to a speaker that ruled them together, a guardian of immense responsibility that understood the power that he or she could potentially wield. And then, underneath that, there were several other members of the city's consensus that would be represented. In particular, you had the Vanguard. The Warlock, Titan, and Hunter orders would all eventually find representation here. However, you also had the city's factions being represented, and these are the founding principles upon which some of the first towers were made. These are the conflicts that really forged the first factions. Moving on to some of those factions though, let's actually talk about some of them. Starting off with probably one of the more popular ones, Dead Orbit. Dead Orbit's entire idea is based around this need to escape, but at the same time, they have some kind of incredible fascination with not just the way in which they will escape, hence the reason why they build immense fleets of ships that would not only fight their way through the debris, but also would carry people to safety, but also they have this incredible fascination with space travel and exploration as a result. They believe that the Traveler being dead is pretty much a sign that the entire system is lost, and that's why we should try and find another place to go. Clearly they are the faction that is probably the least invested in the city. Frankly, they believe that it's just a place where we're all going to die unless we leave very quickly, but at the same time, it's kind of remarkable how much they've done. You have to admire the resilience of a faction that has been able to literally build a fleet in order to fulfill their wishes. And in a certain sense, there is some truth. We don't know whether the Traveler will awaken, and so they may actually prove to be a vital faction at some point in the future. If ever we should need to leave Sol, Dead Orbit is going to be some vaguely reasonable faction that would shepherd us over there. However, this isn't to say that they aren't extreme in quite a lot of other measures. Their armor is, given descriptions such as, not everyone will make it, not everyone will survive, but we must try. They openly acknowledge that their path will lead to ruin and death, but they also acknowledge that this path is born of a need to survive. This rugged anticipation of the coming war and the coming fight, and of every danger that's around them, the Fallen, the Vex, the Hive, the Cabal, every single one of these dangers weighs heavily upon the Dead Orbit faction, and their Aruks, who essentially are their political leaders, each of them probably commanding a fleet, or at least a small portion of the fleet, will then bring this to bear as heavily as they can in any faction meeting. They also bring this to bear heavily in any decision making that the consensus has, and the consensus must always find agreement. So Dead Orbit holds quite some respect and responsibility as a result. They are, however, known to be more clandestine than some of the other factions. Their actions, more often than not, do not coincide with Tower's lore. So, in other words, there are instances where their fleets have been exploring the wreckage of the reef, or other areas of uncharted space throughout our solar system in order to find pieces of salvageable equipment, maybe even whole ships that they can add to their fleets, such as the desperation of Dead Orbit. Their fatalism often means that I don't actually admire them. I believe that the Traveler is where we should stand personally, but heck, there's a lot of people who agree with what Dead Orbit says. And, of course, you have to remember, they could potentially be correct. However, that's not to say that they are correct, and this is where an opposing faction to Dead Orbit comes in, one that believes the exact opposite. They believe not simply that they should abandon the solar system, but more that they should reclaim it, that this is our home and we should stand by it. Meet the New Monarchy. The New Monarchy is born out of a single principle that really started from the end of the faction war. They have a very sort of positive outlook on things, and they would probably be the best marketed faction out there nowadays. Their simple principle that they put above most other things is Together We Rise. They are all about making the last safe city on Earth a better place to live and a safer place. They're all about reclaiming Earth, and then Mars, and then Venus, and then Mercury, and then anywhere else that they happen to have lost in this solar system. They are very much one of the more positive factions out there at this current point. However, they have some very interesting principles. Whilst you look at New Monarchy on the outside and you see, yeah, sure, they have executors, they seem to have an organized structure, and they have individuals that do seem to represent them well, you also have to remember that New Monarchy has a very interesting and rather sketchy final tenant. You see, the New Monarchy, as well as its central tenant, which of course, Together We Rise, very inclusive, it does also have 7 main tenets that it holds, including securing the walls against enemies without, to secure the rights and liberties of upstanding citizens, to sponsor the sciences of the city and to salvage the ruins beyond so that our golden age might be reborn, to support the guardian orders by leading the city in technological innovation, to support the natural harmony of the city and actively dissuade any group or individual that might disrupt harmony, to uphold all individuals, compacts, and alliances to the highest standards of productivity and right behavior, and that makes 6 of their 7. All of those thus far seem pretty good. I mean, there's almost nothing wrong with any of those points. You'd say, yeah, sure, we want law, we want to make sure that everybody has their highest production standards, we want to make sure that everybody's living to the best of their possibility. All of these seem to be nothing more than a very efficient, productive, and hopefully prosperous society. But the 7th tenant is rather terrifying. to, by vote of the consensus, abolish the consensus and transfer ultimate power in order that the rights and liberties of all citizens be secured to a single sovereign of unimpeachable character. In other words, a king that you cannot remove no matter what he does. This is a horrifying final end state. There are so many times in which we have seen dictators do terrible things, autocrats do terrible things. World Wars I and II were pretty much bound to happen simply due to the actions of these individuals, and so you can see why all of a sudden the new monarchy doesn't seem so fantastic anymore. Now, of course, this is not to say that all monarchs are bad, quite the opposite. Some monarchs can be good, but the idea of having a single sovereign of unimpeachable character means that you can easily turn quite a lot of people away from the new monarchy. And then you have to consider that, yeah, that individual may start out very well, but they could easily be corrupted. Guardians, however, are very much aware of this. A little known fact is that at one point, the individual that New Monarchy approached in order to be elected as the single sovereign was Commander Zavala of the Titan Vanguard faction. However, he turned it down because his duties as a Guardian came before that of ruling a city of citizens. Just take a second and imagine that prospect, though. Imagine that someone comes to you and says, "We don't know what the future situation is going to be, but if ever we get to the top, nothing is going to stop us from making you our supreme ruler and giving you unlimited power. You'd basically rule all of known civilization." How would you not turn that down? How would any of us not turn that down? It's also well worth noting that New Monarchy tends to pull some of the richer members of the city into its fold. Take Executor Hideo, the faction Executor, for example. He used to be an upstanding citizen and a plasteel manufacturing owner, and he would give lavish gifts to children and elderly people alike, some of the less well-off citizens of the city, and generally he was seen as a good man. But then he found the New Monarchy, and all of a sudden he changed. His business became much less free, and all of a sudden his funding, well, he wasn't so free with that either. He was very much a staunch defender of the New Monarchy's principles, and he realized all of a sudden that the money could be put to better use through the faction. So, whilst he still does speak with genuine compassion and conviction, he's very much in the thrall of the ideals of the New Monarchy. This is a faction that really does rely on the belief of its members. And finally, probably the most mysterious of the factions, the future War Cult. All we know really about the War Cult is that their origins are mysterious and that they are always in a state of believing that war is the natural state of existence. It is not simply a case that we go from periods of peace to periods of war. War is everywhere. And the War Cult don't just limit themselves to seeing war as a conflict between two declared entities, such as, say, modern-day countries in our world, or, say, the Cabal and the last safe city on Earth, or maybe two fallen houses. They see war in everything. They see war in everything down to the existence of molecules. They see it in time itself. They see time as simply one massive fire, and there will supposedly be a final war according to their beliefs. A final war that they intend to prepare for, and they believe will come at some point soon. The War Cult is unbelievably mysterious, and something like this is made even more clear by the fact that we now know that one of their members was Praedyth. Praedyth, as in Praedyth in the Vault of Glass fire team, the one that was also with Kabir and Pahanin when they entered. This mysterious fire team that was so utterly obsessed with the Vex. It's also well worth noting that in the clandestine works of the organization, they have experimented with certain devices found in Golden Age laboratories, which supposedly give people the ability to look into the future. Now, they test these devices on multiple different subjects, and throughout their research they find that no human is capable of going into the device and then coming out without going completely insane. Which means we have to then pose a question, what if an exo entered these devices? You can find all this stuff in the Grimoire cards, and I think I'll link that last one for the future War Cult because it's kind of fascinating, including an audio Grimoire card version that we've done on Guardian Radio. There is also one final faction out there, a faction known as the Concordat, but I really want to leave that story for now. The Concordat was eventually defeated by the New Monarchy, but the details, they're really kind of slim, they're not well explained. And frankly, I want to leave it just so that we can maybe hopefully get more on that story and find out more behind the Concordat themselves, because we know quite a bit about the other factions, but we don't know what the Concordat believed. The only thing we know is that they had a leader known as Lysander, and he was eventually evicted from the Consensus. But in the meantime, though, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Extra Lore. My name is Bife. Tell me what you want the next episode of Extra Lore to be on in the comments section down below.
What is spec?
Our story begins as so many do. At rebirth. A ghost found her guardian, and he was awakened. An exo, designated as Saint. These are the tales of his existence after his memory was wiped for the 13th time. His story leads us to the Battle of the Six Fronts, when the defenders of the city lined the walls to defend against the House of Devils. From the fires of this battle, legends would be forged. The Lords of Iron, Scory, Fellwinter, Radagast, and so many others were amongst them. But Saint 14 was there as well, and he held fast against the onslaught of Fallen. However, along the walls a different legend was also rising. Beside the Lords of Iron, a great warlock held off the Fallen onslaught and brought the power of the Void to bear against them. His name was Osiris. When the battle had ended, the speaker took note of both him and Saint 14. The three stood as powerful symbols of peace. Guardians that could stave off the darkness and bring hope to the light. Saint 14 was a machine of war, but he also understood why the war should be fought. There is no greater example of this than on the day that Saint 14 was walking through the streets of the city and was approached by one of the singers that he had defended. The singer told him, "You protect me and I do nothing in return." Saint 14 humbly requested him to sing, and the singer understood. Acts of kindness and fraternity like this are what made Saint 14 such a symbolic figure. He believed that we all had our purpose, guardian or not, and that we could all work harmoniously to make the city a better place. He was the champion of the people, and such was his relationship with the speaker that they called each other father and son. When Saint 14 saw Osiris on the field of battle, he saw something that he believed to be unique. He saw most warlocks for what they were, philosophers, but the question had passed his mind many times. Were the warlocks simply philosophers, or could they be warriors too? With this he questioned whether they would fight for the light or meditate on its purpose. But in Osiris he saw something different. He believed that he had found something truly rare, a warlock of great pragmatism, one who was not afraid to act in order to achieve results, one who cared for practical solutions and not theoretical dabblings. Saint 14 believed that this trait had to be put to use, and so he called, amongst many others, for Osiris to be elected to the vanguard. The speaker, seeing Osiris's prowess in battle, agreed despite the words of the Concordat, stating that he was misincarnated by a faulty ghost. And so it was. The three Guardians walked as allies. But the peace that they had bought would not last long. The Battle of the Twilight Gap came, and the city was left devastated. In spite of the tides of fallen that assaulted the city, Saint 14 stood vigil and defended it with Osiris once again. Despite the victory of the Twilight Gap, the city was left weakened and desperate. Many Guardians lay dead, and the question remained among the ashes of the conflict: how will we keep the city safe if the Fallen should attack again soon? These times of adversity brought out the true character in many individuals of the city and the tower. It is here that Osiris and Saint 14 both chose to act, albeit in entirely different ways. Osiris believed that if the city's defenses were not reinforced, that they might fail to defend them against another wave of Fallen. So he brokered a deal with the renegade Sunbreaker Titans, mercenaries who defended those who could pay enough. Commander Zavala believed that the cost of working with the Sunbreakers was too high. He believed them to be nothing more than thugs who happened to have been reincarnated as Guardians. He refused to support Osiris's deal and gained the loathing of the Sunbreakers as a result. They were no common thugs. They were warriors of light, titans just as he was. Just because they did not defend the city did not mean they were not also the warriors that fought the darkness, much like he was. Even with this dent in his plans, Osiris was not finished. While Saint 14 had stood with the citizens below, Osiris had begun all this time to inquire into darker knowledge. He dabbled in Thanatonautics, Ahamkara lore, Zur and the Nine. He searched for the answer to the question that had haunted him. What was the true nature of the darkness? For surely you can only hope to conquer that which you know. Eventually, he had had enough of waiting. One day he entered the speaker's chambers. Within those walls, Master argued with Apprentice, and even though they entered as friends, they left as enemies. Osiris departed and formally began a period of exile, taking his most loyal followers willingly and leaving lasting impressions upon the tower. The tower would search for him for many years, but to no avail. Osiris had vanished. And whilst Osiris left the tower in exile, Saint 14 turned to the defense of the city and pondered. There was a principle held by the Titans of the Firebreak Order, of which Saint 14 was a part. It is known as the Firebreak Calculus. In other words, if I choose to stand my ground in a certain place and fight until I die, how much good will I do? Saint 14 pondered such an idea, and looked to his city. Like many in the Firebreak Order, he believed that he could lead the enemy away from the city, and that he could keep the traveler safe in doing so. Firebreak Titans were a controversial order throughout the history of the city. They believed that the Battle of the Six Fronts was a failure. They had lost an opportunity to charge enemy lines and wipe them out for good. Saint 14 would not let the same mistake happen again. He would follow in the footsteps of Jackie and Radagast, two warriors who had led hosts out at the end of the Battle of the Six Fronts in order to reclaim the stretch of land outside the city. But Saint 14 would go one step further. After the Battle of the Twilight Gap, Saint 14 went to the speaker and demanded that he be allowed to crusade against the Fallen, to punish those that would threaten the safety of our walls. The speaker was not easily convinced, but he trusted Saint 14 like he was his own son, and, as a result, Saint 14 was given the speaker's permission. But, in his pursuit of the enemy, the speaker would always remind him of his duties to return and to defend the city that loved him so much. And so it was. Saint 14 left the walls of the city and did battle with the Fallen. He crushed their positions outside the walls, and as the houses fell to his might, the tower ignited flares to show who had retreated. Cold teal for the House of Winter, stark gold for the House of Kings. But Sulcus, the Kell of the House of Devils, would not retreat. and so he and Saint 14 clashed in personal combat. The Kell was strong and overpowered the Titan. He was held aloft by one of the Kell's long arms and choked. But even as his neck was crushed, and his vision began to forsake him, the light had not left Saint 14. With his light still fading, he summoned all that remained, every last effort. He pulled back his head, and with a single mighty blow, he crushed the Kell's skull with a single beat from his own. After this final blow, the Kell lay dead, and Saint 14 looked upon his ghost.
Ghost.
He's dead, alright. So that's it? We're done now?
We are. Get me the speaker.
Opening this channel. Stand on.
Is that you, my son?
It is, Father. The devil Kelsokus is dead. This war is over.
Such courage and power, the greatest ever to brace these worlds. You bring all of us peace. We will light the final flare, devil red. They will all know what you've done.
Father, I don't think I have the energy to return. I'll rest here and come back to be honored when I return.
Of course, son. But
there's something still concerning you. Do more fallen march on the city?
no, not this time. I have word that Osiris was seen on Mercury, the Caloris Basin. He's turned his mind back to the Vex.
Mercury. Too many channels to know. You activate one, you start to feed its veins. He threatens our peace.
Your duty, my son. You must never forget.
I cannot. Ghost, prepare my Vex arsenal and plot a course for Mercury. That old man's about to wake up hell.
After this, Saint 14 left in pursuit of Osiris, and was never seen again. Where he has gone, who knows? Though we cannot find him, his legend lives on in the songs of the city, the paeans written in his name. For he was Saint 14, son of the Speaker. He walked out into the demon light, but at the end, he was brighter. Greetings, Guardians. My name is Byfair. Welcome back to Extra Lore. It's been quite a long time, and before I go into anything else on this particular episode's topic, I want to jump in and talk about what I'm doing with regards to lore episodes. There's like enough for you guys to experience that interests me, even if it doesn't want to with my kind of goes on. But unfortunately, even as time, basic context of the Iron Banner is that it is a tournament in which Guardians prove their strength and test their light against one another. Those that succeed in this tournament that's overseen by Lord Saladin Forge are granted incredible rewards, giving them even greater power. However, the mythos behind the Iron Banner does come from one of the earliest battles of the city. I talked previously about this battle. It was known as the Battle of the Six Fronts. For all of those of you who didn't check out my extra lore on Titans and Titan Orders, you should probably go ahead and check that out. It's something where I basically described the battle in much greater detail. So in this battle, there were 4 orders of Titans that held the 6 fronts of the city against the House of Devils. There were a whole myriad of individuals who were defending the city at this point, and lots of them became legend because of this battle. So this was the earliest point at which we see any references to both Saint 14 and Osiris in particular. So very interesting characters come up there. At the end of the battle, many were dissatisfied amongst the Titan ranks. They had held and the city had been saved and they had beaten the Fallen back. But the Firebreak Order commanders were really dissatisfied. For those of you who don't know, and again, more of this in that Titan video, the basic idea of most Titans is, hey, we're here to defend the city, it's our duty. Firebreak Titans are very different. Firebreak Titans believe that we should be attacking the enemy head-on and creating a distraction as the best way of defending the city. They are not the ones that want to man the walls. And due to this dissatisfaction, two Firebreak commanders at the very end went out and fought against the House of Devils and reclaimed the land outside the city. These two commanders were Jaggi and Radagast, both of them legendary Titans, and both of them are actually enshrined in a number of Titan marks that can be found in both Year 1 and Year 2. I'd recommend going ahead and looking into Jaggi's story again in the Titan video, sorry for referencing it so much, but it's there for the most part that we know it, and it's a special story in itself. But the other host that was joined in with this, Radagast's host, is really kind of where the Iron Banner and all the Iron Lords began. The Iron Banner's host under Radagast was the one that reclaimed 5 miles of city territory, and that's an incredible feat if you think about it, especially considering that this host may not have exactly had too many guardians. You're looking at a house of, Fallen, that has literally thousands upon thousands of Fallen, and then you're looking at simply a handful of guardians, probably no more than a dozen, reclaiming the edge of this city's land. So that's incredible in itself. It's even crazier to think that Jaggi, with a host of no more than 7, managed to reclaim all of the land and then press even further up to the Caspian Sea. But Radagast's host is the one that's best remembered because they returned, and this is how the Iron Banner was originally formed. It's not entirely clear how most of the original myth behind it starts, because you've got to remember that, again, all of this is so very unclearly documented within the entire realm of the lore, but there is a whole lot of it that's documented within the Year 2 artifacts for the Iron Banner, the class items for the Iron Banner, and of course you also have to take into account the PS exclusive armor, which gives us these little tidbits on a whole bunch of the Iron Banner's members. In particular, the legend that they talk about is this. It speaks of the wolves of the Iron Banner meeting under the Red Dawn beneath the Iron Wood. Clearly this is the day before the battle where they actually went out and retook it, although admittedly this could have been sometime far before that. At the time being though, this is the only other referenced battle where these guys are included, so it's only logical to think that this was the time it's referencing. Beneath that, the Iron Wood, the Guardians who are part of this new pact, this new allegiance, all swore upon Radagast's blade to uphold the city. Now for those of you who don't know, Radagast's blade is of course a real Titan artifact, so needless to say, he actually had a sword, and that's what's most impressive about it. The actual description on that reads that as long as the blade of Radagast was whole, the Iron Wolves and the Iron Banner could not be broken. That's incredible. Whatever the case and whatever happened, it may have been the fact that they actually formed that bond through battle, seeing as it talks about how they forged it, and more often than not, when something is forged in Destiny, it's referenced to being forged in the fires of battle. Regardless, they never faltered, and when they emerged from the day and the battle was done, they emerged from the ruins victorious, and they fought onwards, united as the Iron Banner. Most importantly of all, this victory was won for the city, and it was won by Guardians of every single walk of life. So let's go ahead and talk about a few of those Guardians. I mean, we talked already about Radagast. He is a Titan, and he's very much one of the leaders. He's one of the earliest Guardians that's referenced anywhere in the lore of the Iron Banner, and he's definitely the one who formed it, brought it together. He is the original Iron Lord, which is something which means that he needs to be respected quite a lot. There's others out there too. There was Ghaleon, and Ghaleon is referenced as a hunter who stood in true defense of the people of the city, and he was a true guardian to them, even to his demise. The scout rifle that we see in Year 1, known as Ghaleon's demise, indicates that he has died, which means that there is a darker level of story to this. On a note of his death, perhaps, there's a warlock known as Scori, and the one thing that's really beautiful about this is that she's the one who sang out the Iron Song. She sang dirges to those who had been lost, and she actually has a warlock artifact known as Scori's Dirge.
And it's incredible because this particular artifact says that she still sings songs for her lost companions, even though she's apart from the Iron Banner. And that's something which speaks to the incredible strengths of the bonds forged. And it may not just be for Gellion, it may be for some others that have fallen. There's a lot of evidence to state that Segoth was another member of the Iron Banner who fell. And in fact, Segoth's head, yet another warlock artifact pertaining to the Iron Banner, is a Titan helmet that's been, almost eroded by rust, it looks like. And the quote on it says, "Thought we formed the banner to fight the darkness, not ourselves. Just don't bode well, that's all I'm saying." And that's from Gellion. So, other Titans involved in this? Yeah, there were. Silumar is another great example of those. He was supposedly one of those classical Titans who defended the city. In many of his armor pieces he's referenced as the first wall of the city, and he stood in true defense of the people. It's possible entirely that whilst he was angered by the enemies that attacked the city, he wasn't one with the Firebreak Order, and perhaps he was simply following the orders of his commander, Radagast, at the time. It may be that he went unwillingly, but that's all speculation. Next is probably one of the most recognizable and legendary of them, Ephrodite. Hers is a legend that really should resonate with hunters. It goes to say that every single time she saw an enemy of the city, it would fall to her spear, her sniper rifle. Every single time she pulled the trigger, having taken aim, they would die. And that is quite a legend to live up to. Her sniper rifle is one of incredible power, and still in the days of this Crucible, you can see a few people using it because it's one of those super high impact variants. And frankly, something to be feared in PvE as well. A minion of the darkness will meet no greater enemy than Ephrodite's spear, or maybe the Black Spindle. You're putting it on the level of paracausal power of a god there. Next up comes Felwinter, a Voidwalker, one who's probably shrouded in mystery. The interesting thing about Felwinter is not just his shotgun, Felwinter's Lie, which indicates there's probably some kind of trickery going on with Felwinter himself, but it also references him as a warlock who stared into the void and would unleash it upon his enemies. He sounds like one of the darker members of the Iron Banner, but needless to say he would have fought alongside them as well. Perhaps he's the betrayer, if there ever was one. It seems as though the more we talk about the Iron Banner, the more there is this dialogue of them forming and breaking upon the will of others. Speaking of breaking, one must look at Yolda. She is a Titan who is incredibly powerful. The enemies would know true fear under the might of her hammer. Not just possibly the machine gun that we found in Year 1, but maybe even a literal hammer, seeing as Radagast's blade is a literal sword. I wouldn't put it past Bungie to do this. Although it is very much the case that Yolda, I didn't necessarily think she would be a woman. A lot of these names are interchangeable and gender neutral, I suppose, but it just goes to show the Iron Banner's ratio of women to men at this current point seems to be 4 to 5. Very, very equal. I like that. Next up, speaking of women, is Perun. She's kind of the embodiment of a true hunter. She literally sought out the darkness relentlessly, no matter where it would hide, and she would burn it and unleash her fire wherever she found them. This is kind of in reference to her fusion rifle known as Perun's Fire, and that is most certainly a reasonable fusion rifle. I used it a little bit in Year 1, but it's nothing exactly impressive. Something that a few people will have picked up, though, is Timer's Lash. Timer himself was a warlock, and this is why I love it so much. When I read the description on the warlock arms about him, he is the warlock who supposedly was the most dreaded enemy of the darkness among the Iron Wolves. That means he was incredibly powerful. No one has any idea what particular subclass he was, but at the same time, to be one of the most powerful and dreaded warlocks, that speaks of incredible power. It's also noted that in this original Iron Host, it's not entirely clear whether Saladin Forge was a part of it. He may have simply picked it up as part of the legacy left behind by Radagast. Seeing as his blade is broken, it may be the case that Radagast himself is also dead. Segoth's head, again, is another indication of how many of the combatants within the Iron Banner died, but there are other names, even so, the Iron Companions, the Iron Wolves, that are listed, and we simply do not have enough information to talk more of them. Names such as Hakon, Fenala, Nerwin, Colivance, Wayloran, Deidris, Ashraven, Bretamart, and Tormod. These are names of Iron Lords regardless of how you see it.
and necessarily they must have had incredible feats to qualify as such Iron Lords. So it begs the question, what is their story? How do they fit into this? So far it feels as though there was a dialogue of great unity, a group that stood forth against the oncoming fallen tide, somehow succeeded, and yet somehow broke. Maybe during the same battle, maybe later down the line, maybe this is the reason they only managed to march 5 miles. But whatever the case, the Iron Banner and all the Iron Lords below it stand for one unifying principle: honor. Those of you who take part in the Iron Banner, in terms of Destiny's lore and mythos, you do more than simply take part in a Crucible tournament. You're testing your light in honor of those who have fallen. You're doing so and you're defeating your opponents not so that you can prove your own superiority, but so that you can bring honor and glory to the light. That in itself makes the Iron Banner somewhat more appealing and attractive to me personally. It's got a little bit more of a tinge to nobility about it. I think that's something that Destiny's universe pulls off pretty well. Anyway, tell me what you guys think you want for the next extra lore topic. That's all I've got for you, sadly. As I said, the lore around the Iron Banner is not at all very specific. It's really, really thin. Let me tell you the story of when the Guardians first encountered the Cabal. It was the first days back on the frontier, when we'd finally found a way to repower the old jump ships and explore what remained of the colonies. There were 2 Guardians. While both served the light, in all other ways they were rivals. One spent his days searching forgotten places for lost treasures. The other sought ever greater challenges in a ceaseless quest for glory. One day, both Guardians detected a strange signal coming from a buried city on Mars. The Warlock, hoping to find forgotten caches, vowed to keep his secret until he alone had a chance to explore the site. The Hunter, seeing a chance to earn the renown she craved, also told no one. Thus, both Guardians walked into peril alone and unprepared. It was not long before their paths crossed. The Warlock mocked his rival's pride. The Hunter ridiculed her rival as a dirt grubber. In their anger, they turned on one another, and never saw danger approach. The Sand Eaters came in force. The Centurions jumped into range before the Guardians could react. The steps of the Colossus shook the ground. The Phalanx's shields created a wall that no weapon could penetrate, and the legionaries moved in for the kill. Faced with certain destruction, the Guardians did the only thing they could. They fought. Back to back, they battled the Cabal for a day and a night. Black oil soaked into the sand until the ground was slick with death. The shields and armor of the dead littered the battlefield, but still the Cabal came. The Guardians died, revived, and died again. Still they fought, protecting one another. With his last bit of strength, the Warlock used the Void to destroy their enemies, and with her last bullet, the Hunter saved her friend from the Colossus. At last, the battlefield fell silent. Only the Guardians stood. Abandoning their quests, they returned to the city to warn the Vanguard of the threat rising on Mars. From that day to this, the pair have been the closest of companions. In their journeys together, they have found both riches and renown. But these things mean nothing unless they are shared.
Wait, I thought I'd heard the story before, but it was about 2 Guardians and the Hive.
No, it wasn't. It was about the Vault of Glass.
Who says there was one story? After all, these were the Crimson Days.
If you don't know.
After great deliberation, it was determined that the Ahamkara be made extinct. It was not an easy decision. Power had been obtained from the bargains, and the city needed power. Knowledge had been gleaned, and the Ahamkara knew answers to questions no one had known to ask. But the price was too high, and no edict or forbearance seemed to stop Guardians from seeking them out, driven by hope, or vengeance, or despair. The call had to be silenced, so the Great Hunt did its work.
You know what must be done. End it.
And thus, the Ahamkara were made extinct.
End it!
Their call silenced. Their solipsistic flatteries erased. Their great design, if it ever existed, broken. Of this you can be assured, O reader mine.
Moving.
Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. Welcome back to Extra Lore. This time I wanted to go ahead and start with a series of videos. I also thought that, there's other better ways that potentially we can do this. And I feel like it's good to not only do that now, but also to go ahead and tell you the stories in a little bit more depth and read the grimoire to you for this. A small side note on other lore projects that we have. It's also worth noting that we have literally all but one of the pieces of art for the third episode of the Book of Sorrows completed, so hopefully you can expect that within a fortnight. I'm excited generally. I'm gonna go ahead and start doing both, so let's experiment with this a little bit. But anyway, I want to go ahead and explain each of the individual stories of the Iron Lords, so let's go ahead and start from the very beginning. After the collapse, there's a period of time in Destiny's history known as the Dark Age. This is when the first true Guardians really appear. However, they're not actually called Guardians at this point. Guardian is a name given to an individual gifted with the Traveler's Light, but at the start of the Dark Age, the term had not really been normalized or even used. The Guardians of the day were instead known as the Risen,
You'll notice that that's a very amoral phrase. It implies neither good nor evil, and there's a good reason for that, given that back in the day, not all of those gifted with the Traveler's Light were using their powers for good. Back in the day, individuals who did abuse their powers were pretty prevalent, and they were known as warlords. But, as the Razor's Grimoire card states, some amongst the Risen challenged the dissolution of all that could be. One amongst them was Radagast, and his story is where we shall begin. Radagast was the founder of the Iron Banner, the first amongst their number, and is often seen as the king of the Knights of the Iron Banner, though he would insist that he's merely the first among equals. The first story is a tale of that founding of the Iron Banner. The Grimoire card is set within the ruins of a town which has recently seen a battle take place within its borders. It has been burned to the ground by the fighting, which was started by the warlords hunting Radagast and his fellow Risen Guardians. It reads as follows. Radagast strode through the ash. A cloud hung in his wake as he made his way to the top of the rise. Scars marred his armor, and his sidearm lay in the dust. He didn't need it now. The battle was over. This had been a mining outpost once. A few buildings and a transport nestled amid a small forest. It had been like a precious jewel set atop the dull crown of the wildlands. Now there was almost nothing left. The warrior began to walk slowly down into the valley. He pulled his helm from his head and let it drop with a muted thud into the ash. Of the forest only stumps remained. Of the small village there was no trace. The buildings reduced to splinters. Here and there you could see the dull grey signs of inhabitation. At the bottom of the valley, Radagast came to the source of the ash, death, and violence. The Lightbearers were laid out in a row. Simple cloth covered their armor and robed forms. There were 5 of them, and they had been lined up beneath the melted girders of the settlement's great hall. These warlords had terrorized this part of the world for years. Hundreds had died at their hands. Radagast turned as his companions crossed the valley floor to join him. They had been policing the dead, finding a fitting end for the settlers and miners of the outpost. Yolder came with a steady glide, energy and fire. Saladin, calm and slow, the weight of the dead on his shoulders. In formation behind them stepped Perun, her boots barely leaving a trace as she walked. They gathered before him. Never again, he intoned in words quietly. The others stood as battle-scarred statues. We ride against despots and warlords. We hide in these enclaves, hoping that other Lightbearers will not find us. We fear each other. He shook his head, his fists clenched. And we should not. We are stronger together. We are mighty together. All we have to fear is this. He pointed down at the dead warlords. Giving in, allowing the power of the light to blind us to what we truly are. It was Perun, of course, who asked the first question. What are we? No judgment, no reproach. Still, Radagast could feel their doubt. He turned upwards, and his eyes settled on the massive span that supported the hall. His eyes shone as he turned back to his fellows. We will be what the people need us to be. We will be guardians. We will be protectors. We will hold the last of us together. His voice rang out across the still valley. Our days of hiding are ended. Say it now, each of you. Who amongst the other bearers do you trust? Who can be counted on to ride with us? Bretamart, said Yolder. Daedrus, said Perun. I trust only you, Radagast, said Saladin, and their leader scowled in response. What are you saying? What are we? Perun asked again. Radagast smiled. We will gather those you trust. We will not wait for this to force our hand. He gestured around him. We will ride against those that would use the light against our own. Humanity must have protectors, like the knights of old. Around them, the dust swirled in the air. Shafts of sunlight coalesced in long, slanted bars as the sun dipped towards the horizon. Are you with me? Will you stand with me as Iron Lords? In the waning light, their answers rang like thunder in the air. This was the oath made by the first of the Iron Lords, to be guardians of the last survivors of the collapse, to ride against the warlords, and to fight until the last. This was an oath that would be bound to Radagast's blade, the legendary sword. It would signify the unity of the Iron Lords as a greater whole, and as the legend goes, so long as this blade was whole, the Iron Banner could not be broken. But despite all of Radagast's fury, he would eventually fall, and his blade would be broken. The Siva replication complex would be his tomb, much like that of many other Iron Lords. But their stories are ones for other times. Soon I shall resume these tales. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're looking forward to more lore stuff, do let me know in the comments section down below. Not just the animated stuff, but also this. I intend to make this a bit more prominent as far as Greetings, Guardians. My name is Byfear. Welcome to... On the King's throne, two Cabal commanders, Valus Tlern and Valus Maul, set their plans in motion. They were Bond brothers, bound to fight side by side with their Primus, who had been taken by Oryx. They were the last ranking Cabal officers within the system of Sol. Their duty? To enact the will of the Empire, no matter the cost. They had been instructed to destroy the Dreadnought's core by any means necessary, and they would have succeeded had it not been for the Vanguard's ceaseless tactic of preemptive strikes against enemy commanders and strongholds. You stood there that day and faced them. They fought valiantly, but you prevailed. And with their deaths, a new sense of fear was spread through the ranks of the Skyburners Legion. They had no plan B. With the collision of the Dantalian Exodus 6 into the hull of the Dreadnought, they had no other plans, no other options, save for one that spoke of great shame. And to this shame they submitted, as no soldier of the Cabal Empire wishes to do. They submitted to send a distress signal back across the dark reaches of space. This signal was not simply to be received by one other officer, though. This was a message addressed to the head of the Cabal Empire himself. The Cryptarchs have not finished deciphering its contents. We can only guess at them. Perhaps they spoke of Oryx's power to take. Perhaps they spoke of the failure of each of the legions, from Sand-Eaters to Siege Dancers. Perhaps they spoke of us, paracausal beings of immense power, defenders of the last safe city on Earth, a place of ignorance, ringed in spears much as it was filled with peace. Whatever they sent, the Empire's response was the same regardless. Their strategy was ruthless, their resolve unbreakable, their weapon a legion with banners as red as blood, and a commander whose wrath would test even the most powerful Guardians. His arrival in Sol would bring an abrupt end to the Age of Triumph, and bring about the rise of a second Dark Age. But in our hubris, we failed to see the signs. We failed to prepare. Even after seeing the signal sent from the Dantalian Exodus 6, we trusted in our light alone. But even as he approached, there was writing on the wall. Writing that we saw, perhaps reacted to, but ultimately could not read. The first warning did not come from the Cabal. but from the Fallen, who did something almost completely departed from their typical behavior. En masse, almost overnight, they vanished. They retreated. For hundreds of years, the Fallen have held strong territories throughout the various regions of Sol, from the vast tracts of old Russia to the desecrated wastes of Venus. However, the latest reports sent to Commander Zavala saw several teams sweep the areas occupied by the fallen House of Devils. But instead of the rush of fallen soldiers with their splicer brethren in tow, who normally would greet the FOTC regiments with wire rifles and shock blades in hand, instead, they were greeted only with silence. The scouts asked for Hawk gunships to make aerial surveys of the area. No matter how hard they looked, the House of Devils had vanished. Their proud red banners, which previously dotted the landscape, could be found only in piles of armor and cloth, set ablaze and left to burn. Following this, reports from around the system came in. Almost all of the major houses had done the same. The House of Exiles had abandoned the moon. The House of Wolves had finally folded in on itself, it seemed. And the House of Winter had silently left the strongholds it held on Venus for years. Amongst the scouts was an infamous sparrow racer by the name of Marcus Wren, who made such a simple but profoundly terrifying statement. The fallen houses are gone. They had been our adversaries for centuries, attacking the last safe city multiple times, at Twilight Gap and Six Fronts, bringing it to its knees at these times of great crisis, but never breaking us, even as they became our greatest adversaries. Whilst at first, the end of the 100 Years' Siege would be a point of joy, true scholars in the Tower's warlock orders would see this terrifying truth for what it is. For one fallen house to retreat was tactical. For all fallen houses to retreat, something would need to threaten every last fallen, every last Elixni. For them to burn their banners would indicate that this new threat would eradicate any sign of resistance it found. But in the shadows of night, there was one who saw with clarity the fate that the Fallen had feared so much. Her name, Eris Morn, the Last. Ever since her escape from the Hellmouth and the hands of the Hive, her clarity of vision had always been greater. All this despite the lack of her eyes, all this despite the tears of darkness that she endlessly shed. And now, at this time of crisis, she too would depart from the Last City. The purpose of her departure was twofold. Her duty was now a solemn and solitary one. She had killed two of the greatest gods in the Hive Pantheon with the aid of your light and the occasional whispers of Toland's soul from the Netherrealms. Now, she had to face the rest of their demons. Be they the worm gods Ur, Aya, Zol, and Yul, or Xivu-Arath and Savathun, the siblings of Oryx himself. The whole of their pantheon would respond to the death of the Taken King, and she would need to face that evil. As she prepared to leave, she said a last goodbye to one of her last friends. His name was Asher Mur. He was an awoken warlock who had been wounded in battle. And as he lay unconscious in the tower's medical facilities, Eris left him and his ghost with her final words of warning. I am leaving, my old friend. Soon I will take my leave of this lie. I wish we could have spoken, you and I, one last time. But my story here is done. I have avenged those I lost. I must find a new path through the night. The Hive are vast and ancient, a power far beyond our realm. If we are ever to truly face them, ever truly to put an end to their hate, I must step beyond the safety of the city. Be safe, Jensen Scribe. A storm is coming, and I will not be at your side when it finds its way to our shores. Know this, that storm Eris spoke of is not the dark incantations of the Hive, or the hollow screeching of the Vex World mines, but instead is a shadow darker than both, for it is closer to our light. One that threatens to devour all we hold dear. If given the chance, It will smother us, destroy all we hold dear, and break our fragile peace. We have been ringed in spears too long, and now with nowhere to retreat and no one to aid us, we...
If you don't know what's wrong, know where to go.
will break us. His machines will bring fire and death. And under the howls of his hounds, and in the grip of his guard, there will be nothing left of our city. For his is a legion bathed in red, and from his long shadows that legion is led. His name, Gaul, commander of the Red Legion. The next time I talk about the lore of Destiny 2, you can expect me to be talking about either his actions or his arrival in the system of Sol. Regardless. First of all, Nolan North did confirm that he was reprising his role as the Ghost in Destiny 2. Also worth noting that not all the trailers of Destiny feature both the Guardians and their ghosts. Take, for example, the lore of the Jungle trailer of Destiny 1. We also can't be 100% certain why we're going to be increasing our powers in Destiny 2. However, there's some pretty interesting stuff that has to be taken into account when it comes to the invasion of the Red Legion, the messages sent back from the Skyburners, and why this forced that motion by the Emperor. So with all that information in hand, we're going to try and use it to fit together a couple of theories, and then we're going to use those to potentially explain the answers to some of the questions you have. First of all, I want to draw your attention to a piece of grimoire that pertains to the Cabal and what they know about ghosts, guardians, and our ability to be resurrected by the ghosts. The card details a series of Cabal attacks made against guardians, with the results almost always being the same. Cabal numbers being decimated, their positions being overrun, and guardians, even when killed, being revived by their ghosts. Due to the failure of translation, the grimoire card here refers to ghosts as, quote, dead people. The most important part of this, however, is the analysis at the end of the card, which is undoubtedly vital because it provides some important context in this hour of confusion and uncertainty. It provides the secondary context required to understand why the Cabal attack the Dreadnought in the first place. The card reads as follows. The primary threat is the Guardian's individual counter-attrition capability. Guardians can be rebuilt after even total disintegrative trauma. This capability is provided by a small autonomous drone unit called a dead person, translation unclear. The dead person conceals itself during combat. It is not a viable target for direct fire. Saturation attack by artillery, heavy air, or orbital fire may have good effects, although Guardians transmat frequently and refuse to assemble in large formations. Flare analysis suggests that the Hive have developed unconventional counter-dead person capabilities. The capture of Hive leadership might yield vital strategic intelligence, including weapons or tactics capable of defeating Guardians permanently. We advance that the Hive fleet group near Saturn presents a strong target. For the Primus, our highest duty done, unflinchingly loyal, Skyburners 5th Cohort, Auxiliaries, Strategic Intelligence Manifold. It appears that we have become enough of a thorn in their side that they would seek to blight our immortality by any means necessary. We decimated their legions and brought chaos to the Cabal's Martian campaign. It's clear now that whilst the Vex were a point of concern to the Cabal, they were not the greatest adversary in this situation, and nor were the Hive. We were always the highest priority targets on the battlefield and in intelligence briefings. To contain us, it would appear that the Cabal are willing to go to any length, no matter how desperate it might seem. To attempt to capture the Ascendant Hive is a fool's gambit, as the Primus of the Skyburners would discover personally. However, their mere presence on the Dreadnought means that they may have unearthed vital secrets about the very nature of the Light, Guardians, and the Traveler. After all, the Hive have hunted the Traveler since their species ascended from the murky depths of Fundament. Even a piece of information as small as the fact that our light comes from the Traveler itself might have given the Cabal enough of an idea of what they needed to do. My real question is then this. What if the Cabal discovered what the Hive's plans were when it came to the invasion of Sol? More specifically, what if they discovered how the Hive drained the Traveler of its light in the Chamber of Night mission? Now, amazingly enough, that transmission from earlier was sent up the Cabal chain of command, and the message was sent all the way back, and it came from the top of the Cabal Empire. The invasion of the Dreadnought was a very deliberate response to the transmission which contained information about the power of Guardians. It wasn't a response to the fact that Cabal numbers were being decimated on Mars and Phobos. It wasn't even a response necessarily to the appearance of the Taken. This was our doing. We were the cause of this reaction. The fact that this information came back and the fact that they had been ordered to attack the Dreadnought was actually a point of conversation between Valis Tlern and Primus Taun during a battle that the Skyburners were having with the Vex, which proceeded as follows. Particle beams scream and spark off his enormous bulk. Taun yanks him back to cover. A maniple of Phalanx troops rush forward to plug the gap. I have my orders. Our report went all the way up, and the decision came all the way back down. Valis Tlern's blank helmet swivels to stare.
I can't afford therapy.
You mean... It came from the Emperor himself. Taun can feel the pressure gel pumping against his skin, keeping him insulated from this deadly world, keeping him alive. I'm ordered to board and capture the Hive flagship, at any cost. The Vex Minotaur blinks up behind the Phalanx line. Primus Taun's armor paints the target, and he absolutely unloads, putting all his fear and anger and sorrow into the wretched machine. He roars and roars, the Minotaur burns, his soldiers cheer. That's a job for an elite unit, not a few scout legions bogged down in attrition war. We should wait until it's the mission I've been given. I will use what I have. The Traveler is the source of a great deal of our light, and our ghosts were created in defense of that light. They give rebirth to those capable of wielding the Traveler's light as a weapon. Ever jumped off the tower and thought, it's okay, I'll just respawn? Not without your ghost, you won't. So in order to stop us from continuously regenerating, the Cabal would need to take out our ghosts, and in order to strip us of our other powers like the ability to wield the light, for the most part, they'd need to stop the Traveler from emitting the light that we wield, be that the light of a gunslinger, a Nova Bomb from a Voidwalker, or even something as simple as a Fist of Havoc from a Titan. The Hive's method was to drain the Traveler of its light, and probably consume it. But if light flows, and can be channeled, there's no reason why the Cabal might not be able to contain it. In the first shot of the Rally the Troops trailer, we can see that the Traveler does indeed look different. It looks shielded if you look up close, and the shield has the same pigmentation and laser-like structure as that of the new Phalanx shields that we see in the exact same trailer. I believe that this is the work of the Cabal, who've been able to contain the Traveler's light. Now the next question is, what about our ghosts? Well, seeing as they're linked to the Traveler, it's entirely within the bounds of possibility that cutting us off from the Traveler might also have cut off our ghosts, potentially even deactivating them. Having said that, all of this is entirely theoretical. Something that's much more troubling is the idea that we could lose all our abilities that are born of the Traveler. There's actually a little evidence for this, as in the Rally the Troops trailer, there's only ever one use of what we might consider an ability, and that's where Ikora uses Arc Lightning to take out this Phalanx. This is actually pretty significant because the light of Stormcallers, much like that of Nightstalkers and Sunbreakers, is not light that originates from the Traveler. These subclasses instead rely on light-wielding techniques that can be found and learned from out in the wild. Sunbreakers' hammers are, for example, quite literally called the Hammer of Sol, because the light they use to forge their hammers is drawn directly from the sun at the center of our solar system. Meanwhile, Nightstalkers harness their shadow shots by quite literally drawing it forth from the void and the light there. And the Stormcallers, in the Stormcaller subclass quest, actually gain their arc powers by literally becoming one with an arc storm. These powers, and many others, are probably what we need to learn in Destiny 2 as a result of our powers being cut off from the Traveler. However, in a story context, this gives us a very good reason why Ghaul's tactics were so brilliant. These abilities to wield light that does not originate from the Traveler are exceptionally rare. Stormcallers are amongst the rarest of guardians. Night Stalkers are so unheard of that when one is found, they are often a point of being taboo. And Sunbreakers are mercenary guardians who have no tie to the city and trust only in the light born of Sol itself and the fire there. So, with all of this information pieced together, there's two theories I want to present. One, either Gaul has attacked the Traveler and in the process contained its light, cutting a great number of Guardians off from their abilities, which means that we have to search for new techniques to wield light. And secondly, the idea that Gaul has attacked the Traveler, and in order to preserve its light, our ghosts have shielded the Traveler from the Cabal onslaught, thus meaning the diminishing of our own light, and the requirement to find new sources of it out in the wild. But of course, all of this is just theory, and I want to know what you guys think of this. Do you have your own ideas as to why we're losing our powers in Destiny 2? Greetings, Guardians, my name is Byfear. So a lot of you are either new to Destiny and want to jump in at Destiny 2 for the first time, or alternatively, you've been playing the game for 3 years now and you know nothing about what's going on. It's time to fix that. This video is going to go over the entire story of Destiny leading up to Destiny 2. Now keep in mind, I'm going to include everything that I think is really important for newly minted players or someone who's just jumping back into the world again, so that you can all understand the base story and the world that Bungie has constructed. So don't expect me to jump into too many deep stories. For example, I'm not going to be exploring the Book of Sorrows or full achievements of the Iron Lords. I'm certainly not going to be talking about Dredgen Yor and Jaren Ward because their story is not too relevant to everything we do in-game. And I'm also going to be avoiding things about mysterious topics that we have clearly got so much left to discover, such as the Nine. Regardless, I have a few other things to say before we start. Firstly, note that whenever I go into the City Age portion of this video and all of the history of Destiny, Things are going to get a little bit nondescript, and that's purely because we don't have a lot of timeline references for what happened when in the City Age. The way that I'm presenting this is going to be the most logical string of events, and hopefully it's something which is close to the most accurate version of events. Also, there are two people that deserve shout-outs for the help that they've given on this video, the first of which is Octavius, who has helped create a lot of the skeleton for this script, which is now about 17 pages long. He most certainly worked his heart out for this, and I know that he is someone who deserves praise as a result. And secondly, Xander, who is the one who has done a lot of the graphics work and doing cutouts of the various Guardians that are being represented throughout Destiny's timeline. Thanks and praise for both of those two in the comments section would be greatly appreciated. They have put a lot of work into this video just as I have. But without much further ado, let's begin. Starting with the modern day, and principally with an event that will change humanity forever. Imagine that tomorrow, when you all wake up, you turn on the morning news and all of a sudden you see that a mysterious object has appeared over Mars. This is the premise for the start of our modern timeline to Destiny. Something where all of a sudden humanity is presented with the notion that they are indeed not alone in the universe. And 14 months later, humanity has prepared its response. The globe has, for but a small period of time, united, and the astronauts of America, taikonauts of China, and cosmonauts of Russia have each chosen one of their best to take on this great honor and responsibility of the first manned mission to Mars, the mission that would live in history and would be known as Ares 1. These three would then take it upon themselves to explore the surface of Mars, to approach the unknown object, and to understand what had happened. Mars, of course, is a planet with little to no atmosphere, and yet when Ares 1, the craft, came down onto the Martian surface, it came down in the middle of a storm. The breath of God, the wind rattled off of their craft. This was no coincidence. As the three explorers left their craft and set their sights upon the alien object, they realized for the first time one of its functions. It was terraforming Mars. And so, together, an astronaut, a cosmonaut, and a taikonaut stood and bore witness to the first Martian rains, and set their eyes upon the traveler. This would begin what is known as humanity's Golden Age, a time of incredible accomplishment in which humanity has made so many wonders that have now been lost. Human lifespans, for starters, were tripled. Those that lived to 100 in our day would be seen as some of the most long-lived of our species, but in their times, 90 was considered to be young. 300-year-old humans finally existed. All fundamental hatreds and intolerances quickly vanished, and, in a similar sense, the peoples of many nations merged. Nations meaning so much less when the people themselves are united in a common understanding that was born from this simple idea that we were not bound for our petty grievances and poorly thought out wars, but instead, we were born to conquer the stars. Our culture became founded in reasoning, intellectualism, and science, supporting core principles of debate on all sides and on all topics. Centers were founded in the name of progress and reason. The Ishtar Academy on Venus, for example, or the city of Freehold in the dusty red sands of Mars. And then there were other great human marvels. The Baikonur Cosmodrome was set into a massive center of exploration and colonization, and the great metropolis cityscapes of Titan rose above the waves. These are some of humanity's greatest miracles. Our technology advanced tenfold as well. The centers of science and reasoning in the Ishtar Academy on Venus discovered an ancient alien race and their ruins. These were the Vex, and they had existed for many millennia before we had. But even then, there were greater discoveries still made by Chloe Spray. The fourth state of matter, known as Engram, was finally unveiled. This is a state in which data was free from the physical restraints of matter, and in which all sorts of ideas could be created and stored with the simplest of actions. But there were so many more inventions than simply these. Take the war mines, for example, which were the pinnacle of Golden Age technology. From their massive complexes of underground bunkers, they could go forth, bearing weapons capable of scorching the skies of 1,000 worlds black with dust and fire.
With their vast artificial intelligence, they could draw up battle plans to counter and defeat the most ingenious of foes in but the blink of an eye, and with their armies of constructs and frames, they could shatter regimes and blunt offensives from entire legions, one at a time or all at once. These were some of humanity's greatest weapons in the Golden Age, our greatest defenders. But in addition to this, came yet more curious forms of life. The Ahamkara are one of particular note, but there are none as well known to us now as the Exos. These sentient machines appear to have been created by the Clovis Bray Corporation as well. It's speculated by some that these are humans who are able to transfer their consciousness into a mechanical body and thus, theoretically, live forever. Regardless, science by this point had advanced so much that the Exos were considered as valid members of society, just as anyone else would be, though their programming also hints that their nature is a more violent one. They are built and programmed for a relentless war, some great battle long ago forgotten. This is remembered as every single one of them dreams of the Deep Stone Crypt, where they fight an army of thousands of those that they know. But finally, yet another of the inventions of the Clovis Bray Corporation would be once more something that would bear fruit during the Golden Age in its colonization efforts. The invention of a nanotechnology that could be programmed into anything imaginable. This was SIVA. It could be simply directed with one's own will, and could do anything from creating habitation to rebreather suits. Such was the marvel of SIVA as a technology that immediately it began to be used by Golden Age colonists looking to expand out into the stars. At this point, humanity's greatness shone like a beacon in the night, illuminating the stars and convincing us that our destiny was not to remain on Earth alone, falling prey to our petty squabbles from so many years ago, but was instead to ascend to greater heights. But, as Icarus and Daedalus learned in the stories of old, pride can quickly turn to hubris. And so it was the way for us. Our Golden Age and its days of glory were numbered. From beyond the reaches of our solar system, the war minds detected something, a subtle set of signs, but they knew how to interpret their meaning. Something was approaching, something that spelled our doom. It was at this moment that the Exodus Project truly began, our great effort to save our people from near certain annihilation. Millions of people were loaded onto colony ships, bound for destinations beyond the reaches of the oncoming catastrophe. But in spite of our efforts, in spite of the work of all the war minds, in spite of the subminds like Malahiyati, and in spite of General Chen Lanshu and her valiant efforts, it was too little, too late. As the thousands of vessels began to reach the outer edges of the asteroid belt, something terrible began to sweep through the solar system. The war minds raised their mighty weapons to respond with forceful blows that could shatter the stars, and yet even this could not stop the oncoming tide. This force swept through the space that we had known and conquered and decimated all that stood in its way. Those unfortunate enough to be on board the colony ships died in their stasis pods, and the debris from the destruction caused the creation of a vile wreath of dead ships and orbiting stations in the asteroid belt. The rubble from this terrifying event still remains to this day. In the chaos and struggle, the Warmind Rasputin, the first and greatest of the Warminds, the very defender of Earth itself, our home planet, the jewel of our stars, could comprehend the terrible power of this new threat. It was not simply the many alien races that had come and conquered our diverse territories. No, this was something more powerful, something that reached beyond the bounds of the physical universe, something that defied simple causality, something that could even bend the universe to its will, much like the Traveler could. This was our ultimate enemy, the one that we would come to know as the Darkness. This terrible miasma that would wind its way through every coiled path, choking and draining the life from all that it touched. But even here, Rasputin could sense yet another threat. The Traveler was on the move. Once more it was leaving the system, and without the Traveler, all of humanity was certainly doomed. What happened next is not clear. Records of this time are all but lost, our best source being the journals of Cade 6.
They speak of a terrible time of cataclysm, of how the darkness took hold of entire worlds and every living being on those worlds, taking each of them individually in its grasp, leaving them in agony, but allowing them to maintain their clarity of vision. It wanted them to see this. It wanted them to see the engulfing of worlds around them, letting every last one of them, every lost life, echo undeniably with one bit of knowledge. Our worlds no longer belonged to us. They belonged to the darkness, and our destruction at its hands were for the sin of our strength not being great enough. Some speculate that what happened next was the actions of Rasputin, who might have attacked the Traveler in order to prevent its departure. Others state that the Traveler simply took pity upon us all, and would have died regardless to save us. And some still state that the Traveler was not retreating at all, but merely trying to find the perfect patch of ground from which it might be able to battle the darkness. But what is clear is this: the darkness and the Traveler both battled above Earth in a contest of power that would shake the heavens and the very foundations of the universe. And what is more, the Traveler won. Crippled and broken, but victorious, in those last moments of its dying breath, the Traveler created the Ghosts, small autonomous drones filled with its light. These Ghosts would be the salvation of humanity, by seeking out those amongst the long dead who would be capable of wielding the Traveler's light as a weapon.
What is Spectrum Internet? It's invincible Wi-Fi that stays on when the power doesn't.
Staying connected no matter what.
It's everything you want it to be. Switch today at Spectrum.com.
As a weapon. Something to salvation of humanity, by seeking out those amongst the long dead who would be capable of wielding the Traveler's light as a weapon. Something to fight back the darkness. Something that could save us. Whilst they would first be known as the Risen, and would eventually be called Warlords or Iron Lords, these brave souls chosen to fight again within the Traveler's light would be known to us today by a single name. They would be known as the Guardians. On the fringes of the solar system, just as this was occurring, yet another new form of life was appearing. With their grey skin and the potent mixture of both light and darkness running through their veins, the Awoken began to first appear. But even on the horizon, there was yet more ill news. Strange and deadly alien forces that had arrived with the collapse were encroaching still on the territories of what remained of our Golden Age colonies. These four races would come to be known by the remaining peoples of Earth as the Fallen, Hive, Vex, and Cabal. And so, with humanity crippled, our Golden Age lost and our system being overrun by hostile forces, the near-apocalyptic events that would come to be known as the Collapse came to a close, and the Dark Age of humanity began. At first, there were very few people who remained united. Some formed into small towns and banded together for safety, but many on Earth came to be ruled over by the Warlords. These were some of the first Risen, who instead of using their power for good, would come to use their powers for dominance. They ruled over Earth and would use their powers to control the vast tracts of its territory. In opposition to these forces, however, there were some that stood against the despair of autocracy that had been wrought, some who stood against the tyranny of the Warlords and stated that hope should still be at the center of the human life. Everyone deserved a chance. Led by a man named Radagast, the first protectors of humanity would rise to defend us. They would be known as the Iron Lords, and whilst refugees and small towns cowered under the tyranny of the Warlords, the Iron Lords came to their defense, liberating them and defending those who stood against tyranny. All the while, there were refugees still seeking a place to call home. Long, continuous columns of exo-survivors, humans cropping up from everywhere, the occasional awoken, traveling far from their reef-born home. Many traveled to below the Traveler, to the spot of its final, climactic battle with the darkness. These refugees would organize into a massive camp, defended once more by those risen with the Traveler's light, great men and women like Razel Azir. But as time went on, the dissolution of those within this camp of refugees turned into something more violent. Rudimentary factions began to rise, each with their own opinions on how we should lead humanity back to prosperity. From these differences, the first faction wars arose. Had it not been for those that stood and stopped the terrible violence, humanity might well have been snuffed out right then and there. But from the aftermath of this first faction war, the leaders of the city created a new system of governance. The factions would be forever tempered by each other's wills, as well as the newly created Vanguard, a council of 3 guardians, one of each discipline: Hunter, Warlock, and Titan. All proposals would be voted upon and would be sent to the Speaker, the Grand Leader of the city, and the ruler of the Guardian Orders. All of this had to go through him for approval. And so the passion of the factions was put in check, the authority of the Guardians was made clear, and the first ever consensus council of the city resolved to be better and greater than those that came before. And that resolve would soon be put to a test. For the next challenge would not come from within, but from without. The alien races that had arrived in force at the close of the collapse had taken root in both our outer colonies and in the vast territories on Earth, from the Mumbai Push to the European Dead Zone, from the swamps of Old Chicago to the abandoned Cosmodrome at Baikonur. With this, the city had to face against incursions by one particularly craven alien race, known as the Fallen. Previously they had been known as Elixni, but these bipedal aliens had changed ever since they had been uplifted by the Traveler. It had left them too, and this had turned them from a once noble race into a race of spider-like pirates, scavengers, forever hunting the Traveler, or the Great Machine, as they called it in their time. They sought to return it to their fold, so that their species might hopefully enjoy the bounties of a second Golden Age as a result. But this would not be accomplished without bloodshed. And so what started as a small band of raiding parties taking on a small settlement evolved into a perpetual siege that would define the very existence of those that lived within the walls of this small city. And so, in response, the Titans of the city devised a plan. They built a great series of walls to encompass the city and keep those that they protected safe from harm. And so the walls were built, the city grew, and those within this final bastion found some small vestige of harmony. This is not to say that the city was the only place in which humans dwelled. Many towns within the wilds of Earth, such as the fabled settlement of Palamon, still stood, providing shelter and respite for those outside of the city. But such small towns, whilst occasionally raided by the Fallen, were but petty distractions. The true prize for the Fallen was the Great Machine itself, that rested in the sky above this last safe city, this well-defended bastion. And so, day by day, they sat in envy of humanity, until that envy became too great to contain.
Get fast, powerful allergy.
Russia and Asia Minor marched upon the city in force, bringing the full might of their house to bear. This was a true test of the city's new defenses, which had only recently been erected, But the Titan orders of the city were prepared. 4 orders of Titans came together, and with coordination and steel, held a defense that covered the 6 approaches of the city. The Fallen's artillery roared, and their legions of soldiers howled 1,000 curses at the battle lines of the city. But by the time the dust had settled, the Devils were forced to retreat en masse, and not a single one of these 6 fronts had broken. This was the first true trial of the city and its defenders, and from this day forth would be known as the Battle of the 6 Fronts. It would forevermore be remembered as a symbol that marks Titan iconography to this day, and would also give rise to some of the most legendary guardians the city has ever known. But most importantly of all, this marked the beginning of a new age, an age where humanity could find newly restored hope under the Traveler's shadow. This would be known as the City Age, the time where we started to fight back. In the aftermath of the Battle of the 6 Fronts, one of the most notorious defenders of the city was a warlock, who was said from eyewitness reports to have appeared as if he was fighting in multiple places all at once. The name of this powerful warlock was Osiris, and so great was his power that many of the other heroes of the city began to rally around him, most notably the honored Exo-Titan known as Saint 14. He called upon the speaker to appoint Osiris to the Vanguard as its warlock mentor. Such was the speaker's relationship to Saint 14 that the two took to each other's words with great care. They even referred to each other as father and son. And so Saint 14, joining the chorus of supporting voices, convinced the speaker to appoint Osiris to the warlock Vanguard position, to join them, going even as far as to take him as his own apprentice, to teach him what he knew, so that one day, perhaps, he might become the new speaker for the Traveler. However, there was one dissenting voice amongst the cheerful applause when this decision was made. Lysander of the Concordat, a faction that had grown in the infancy of the city, stated that Osiris was a mistake, that he had been misincarnated, a faulty resurrection by a damaged ghost perhaps, or maybe simply someone who wasn't supposed to be a guardian. His claims were quickly dismissed, and the consensus continued its work, with Osiris now as one of the most senior members of its council. Meanwhile, as some new legends rose, others were sadly doomed to fall. The Iron Lords had grown considerably in their strength, and had conquered the warlords entirely from their fortress temple at Vostok Observatory. From above, they watched over the vast lands of our forefathers and kept a steady vigil, defending the city and the rest of humanity from afar. But as their ranks swelled to hundreds and the fires of the Iron Temple grew stronger, their leader, Radagast, was filled with discontent. Him and many of the other Iron Lords sought a way to rekindle the Golden Age that they had lost. Lord Timur believed that he had discovered it, in the form of a Golden Age technology left behind by Clovis Bray, namely, SIVA, the nanotechnology that could not only aid in the colonization efforts so far out in the far-flung colonial worlds, but could also reconstruct the marvels of humanity's Golden Age here at home, returning us to our place amongst the stars. But Radagast, who held so firmly to his belief that the technology of the past was the key to our future, was blinded to the true danger that SIVA presented. More than 100 Iron Lords marched into the Cosmodrome to reclaim SIVA, but Rasputin, who still maintained control of the nanotechnology, gave a directive to the billions of nanites that would spell doom for the Iron Lords. The directive was simple, 3 words initiated upon finishing a conversation he'd had with the Iron Lord Exo Warlock, Fellwinter. These 3 words: replicate, eliminate, immunize. And with that, SIVA was unleashed upon the Iron Lords within the northeastern sector of the Cosmodrome, breaking them and consuming them all, one at a time. Only 9 Iron Lords managed to reach the replication chamber that was the source of all the SIVA. In the end, Lady Yolda set off an explosion and sealed the doors of this chamber, thus preventing more Siva from escaping out onto the surface. By the end of the battle, the Iron Lords were crippled. Only 2 Iron Lords remained. The hunter, Lady Ephrodite, who quickly fled and abandoned her warlike ways for a path of peace, and Lord Saladin, who would be the lone sentinel to stand over the Iron Temple and watch its braziers dim once more. All the while, more threats were marshalling, and the city once again would have to face these terrible threats. Without the Iron Lords defending the territories of Earth or pushing back the fallen houses further, the city became vulnerable once more. And so, the Fallen once again began to create a great plan to reclaim the Traveler. However, in the light of the Devil's failure at the Battle of the Six Fronts, it was clear that no single house could conquer the city. And so, 4 fallen houses united to attack the city in unison. The houses of Devils, Kings, Winter, and Wolves united their forces into one of the greatest armadas that the system of Sol had ever borne witness to, and they began their march to Earth, so that eventually, even after a long bloody battle, they might finally stand atop the corpses of those humans that had defied them previously, and together reclaim the Great Machine. The might of these 4 houses combined would have been crushing to the city, particularly with the House of Wolves, who maintained a mighty fleet and a vast army of over 1 million fallen soldiers. And so, the Fallen descended upon the city, and the greatest battle that we had ever seen within the city's walls ensued. The defense of the city was to be taken up by 3 guardians. Lord Saladin, the former Iron Lord, would coordinate the defenses with his 2 protégés, Commander Zavala and Lord Shaxx. They would each take command of considerable forces within the city's walls, and all 3 were vital to the defense. Once again, the Guardians took to the walls, which were now heavily defended with salvaged weapon emplacements and thousands upon thousands of combat frames. Warlocks worked in concert, using great waves of void and solar light to drown the oncoming waves of fallen aggressors. The Titans manned the walls of the city with zeal and fortitude like they had done before, and the golden guns of the gunslingers rang out in song to answer the onslaught. But in spite of it all, the efforts of our great defenders weren't quite enough. The Fallen made significant advances, and eventually tore a hole in our defenses at Twilight Gap. With but a single breach in the walls and the city's defenses, our defenders could all in time be outflanked, and every last one of them could be brought to their knees. Whilst Lord Saladin ordered a tactical retreat, Lord Shaxx took action. He disobeyed this order and took all of the combat frames under his command, sending them to flood the breach, plugging the hole. He himself was found at the heart of this battle, along with the Guardians under his command, holding the line in spite of the lack of fortification, holding against almost all odds. The magnitude of this decision should not be understated. The frames and forces that Lord Shaxx had committed to the breach were vital parts of the defense force of the city. If his gambit failed, the city was doomed. There would not be enough forces to hold on the waves, as all others retreated to the secondary lines of defense. But luckily for us, the gambit worked. The breach was plugged, and Lord Shaxx stood victorious with his frames atop a mountain of fallen corpses. The battle was won, and the city lived to see another day. The House of Devils, Kings, and Winter lay defeated. But what of the House of Wolves and their millions of soldiers? They had been noticeably absent from the Battle of the Twilight Gap, and this was no accident. Despite the bravery of Lord Shaxx and his forces that day, the city's true savior lay far out in the vacuum of space. Within the territories of the Reef, an awoken monarchy had begun to grow in power. This was the Vestian dynasty, and from their fold many noble names and houses rose, with an entire society at their heels. This was absolutely departed from the city. The Awoken as a society were matriarchal.
fiercely territorial, a spacefaring people with an isolationist streak that demanded that they should live without revealing their presence to others. But before the Battle of the Twilight Gap, the 6th monarch of the Vestian dynasty, the 6th ruler and the throne beneath the Howling Dark, Mara Sov, Queen of the Awoken, was gifted with a choice. The House of Wolves had positioned their fleet at the asteroid of Ceres, and were poised to move further into the core worlds to strike at Earth when they had refueled from the asteroid's bounty. The Wolves had breached Awoken space and had violated their territorial borders in doing so, leaving Mara Sov with two choices. She could simply let the Wolves pass, letting their violation of Awoken space go unanswered, and thus dooming the city. Or alternatively, she could engage the Wolves at her door, showing them that the Awoken of the Reef were not a force to be trifled with. Two choices, one of peace potentially, and the other of certain war. A choice that would affect millions across the solar system, both human and Awoken, not to mention the Fallen. And Mara Sov chose war. She unleashed a weapon upon the fallen House of Wolves fleet, called the Harbinger. This was a powerful enough weapon to destroy over half of their ships, and more than 500,000 fallen soldiers, along with the entire asteroid of Ceres in the process. This would mark the beginning of a series of deep space sieges and great skirmishes known as the Reef Wars, where the House of Wolves, led by its newly founded Kel, Skolas the Rabid, would face off against Mara Sov and her Awoken paladins of the Reef. In the end, thanks to the intervention of Varix, a fallen scribe of House Judgment, Skolas was captured. Varix and the Queen offered the fallen of the Wolves a choice. Either join and serve nobly under Mara, or join Skolas and languish within the prison of elders. Most of the Wolves joined Mara, given that their succession rules actually dictated that she technically should be their leader. She had slain the former Kel when she unleashed the Harbingers, and Skolas had merely picked up the pieces. But she paid for this victory with many Awoken lives. In the end, however, as a consequence of her actions, whether she meant it or not, whether she knew that it would be a bargaining chip later in her existence, or whether it was completely unexpectedly, she had saved the city with that choice. And back on Earth, they had sorely needed such relief.
I started a business to give old clothes a new life, and Chase has supported me from the beginning.
1 in 3 males over 40 experience drips and dribbles. But imagine being this comfortable with it.
Hi. Now we're comfortable, let's talk urine leakage. Tenna Men Maximum Guards are designed for men. Slips discreetly into my underwear. You'd never know. And they protect like Tenna, so no more dribble dramas.
Yeah.
The Battle of the Twilight Gap had left the city weakened and desperate. The leader of the Concordat, Lysander, had chosen at this time, when the city was at its weakest and its defenders were weary, to rise up against the Speaker. But this rebellion was swiftly crushed by the troopers and guardians that had aligned themselves with New Monarchy. Their final battle at Bannerfall shows still the scars that Lysander has left on this city. Lysander himself spent the rest of his time in exile, fleeing the boundaries of our walls, leaving for the wilds, planning his inevitable return, plotting all the while. In the meantime, the Concordat was officially disbanded, and a new faction was chosen to join the Council of the Consensus, namely, the Future War Cult. This sudden rebellion by Lysander, along with the major wounds that the Fallen had dealt to the city's defenders, led those within the city of great inspiration to come up with ways to improve our defenses and to hone our skills once again, if we would be attacked in the future. For these measures, we would most certainly be stronger. Faisal Crux and Victor Lomar of the Crux Lomar Foundry were some of the first. They decided to honor the Guardians that had fallen under the banners of the city at Twilight Gap. And they made such honors within a new weapons project from their foundry known as Project Heimdall. This honored those that had died in service of the city, forging their armor into a design of immense power, the Yalahorn shoulder-mounted launcher system. a weapon that roared with the fury of those guardians that had fallen in battle and allowed their light to fight on even after they had perished. Meanwhile, Lord Shaxx had a plan of his own. Many of the guardians that had died at Twilight Gap may well have been veterans of great skill and power. Legends may have been lost in that battle that may never have been replaced, and replacing them with younger guardians who were less wise left the city unquestionably weaker, not to mention the thinned numbers. So, Lord Shaxx presented the consensus with a plan to clear out small portions of land and turn them into training areas in which guardians would battle each other to hone their skills and earn glory. The approval for such a training system was given, and for the first time guardians faced each other in the greatest challenge they had ever been provided. This would be a new venue, a new sport, a new pastime, but most importantly, it would be the moment in which the Crucible was founded. Eventually, the Crucible games grew to such a great magnitude that even for those in the city it became a televised pastime, with gambling on matches becoming commonplace and citizens wearing proudly the colors of their most beloved Crucible champions. Legends such as Thalor, Dredgen Yor, and Pahanin rose to prevalence because of the Crucible. At such a founding time of the Crucible, the city was still weakened, and so such happiness as being elated by the victory of a champion was far off. The city was still in its weakened state at this point, and so little time for such frivolity was found. This, of course, not only included the regular citizens of the city, but also those on the Consensus Council and the Vanguard. Our next tale turns to Osiris, who of course as a member of the Vanguard was central to the question of how the city should be defended, and he saw only one answer. He saw that the Fallen, the Hive, the Vex, and the Cabal weren't truly our enemy. No, they were puppets of a darker power that moved beyond the system's edge, slowly regrowing in magnitude and strength. Whether they were conscious and willing like the Hive, or unconscious and uncontrollable like the Fallen, they all served as but a distraction, as a means of weakening the city by attrition. The true enemy was the darkness, and Osiris believed that if we were to defeat the darkness, we would need to understand it. So at this time of great cost and great peril to the city, Osiris began to stray away from his duties as a Vanguard mentor. Instead, he chose to dabble in taboo, exploring Thanatonautics, the art of gleaning knowledge from beyond death. He chased the dragons of the Ahamkara for yet more of the lore surrounding them and their mysterious bargains, and even went on a hunt for the agents of the Nine, the mysterious organization that occasionally visited the city with one of its agents, bringing incredibly rare gear in the process. By this point, Osiris had become a cult of personality amongst the guardians of the city. In the end, him and the Speaker were found at odds because of these taboo practices. Master and apprentice one day gathered in the Speaker's chambers. What was said that day is not recorded, but it is known that Osiris left that day in exile, taking many of his followers with him. Whether this was by his own choice, or by the Speaker's decree, is something not known, even to this day. However, his influence would have long-lasting effects on the tower, for many of those who had followed Osiris remained within the city, following his ways with their actions, if not with their feet. Whilst all of this was happening, there was one who decided to take it upon himself to be the vengeance of the city. Who had originally called for the appointment of Osiris to the Vanguard, had studied well the codex of the Firebreak Titan Order, and had come to a single conclusion. The best defense for the city was a strong offensive campaign of retribution, and so he began what would be known as the Crusades of Saint 14 against the fallen houses, decimating their forces that still surrounded the city wherever he found them. As each of these great houses was dealt a significant blow, the city ignited flares in great colors to celebrate Saint 14's victory. After enough time and destruction, all that remained was the fallen House of Devils and their Kell Sulcus. The Kell and Saint 14 engaged each other in single combat, and it looked at first as though the mighty Titan had at last found his match. The Kell was strangling him to death with but one of his four mighty arms. As a final desperate gambit, Saint 14 summoned all the light that he had left, all the remaining strength, and channeled it into a single mighty blow. The Kell of the House of Devils fell. His skull caved in from a single blow from Saint 14's own skull. With such a mighty feat accomplished, Saint 14 contacted the Speaker, and was informed by him personally that they would like the final one of the flares, Devil Red. But something still concerned the Speaker. Osiris had been sighted on Mercury, a place known for common Vex incursions, an entire world that had been converted into one of their machine planets. Knowing of this exiled warlock and the danger that he might pose, Saint 14 began a hunt for his former friend. In the end, both Saint 14 and Osiris disappeared, and neither have been seen to this day. However, Osiris still inspired many of the Guardians at home to action. One of those most famously driven to action by his words was a Titan known as Kabir, the Legionless. A maverick, much like Osiris, Kabir took it upon himself to begin a monumental task. He would enter the Vex stronghold below Venus, known as the Vault of Glass, and purge the Vex from it. For this task he enlisted 2 other Guardians. A renowned Guardian known as Pahanin, whose quips and phrases are commonly remembered by hunters to this day, be it the calling of their cloaks as frabjous, or simply telling them not to remind warlocks that they were taught to blink by warlocks. And secondly, a warlock known as Praedith, a warlock of the future war cult, who themselves are always obsessed with time, and thus the Vex were always of interest. Of the 3 of them that entered the vault, only one survived. Pahanin fled for his life from the vault after seeing the Vex within, and the fact that they had the power to remove all those that entered from the very reality of time itself. He would forever be haunted by the realization of their power, and would even install an artificial intelligence into one of his favorite weapons to ensure that he was never alone. For being erased by a Vex is not simply to die, it is to never have existed, to have all memory of your name rewritten and removed from the timeline itself. Praedith found himself lost among the warp and weft of time, imprisoned within the vault by the Vex until such a time as he was useful to them. And Kabir's fate was the worst, for he drank of the oracles, the Vex constructs that are designed to solve unfathomable computations. But when consumed, the Radioloria within them began to turn Kabir into a Vex, and so his memory was lost, save for his light, which he stored within a shield, so that those that followed might have a hope to breach the vault for themselves, and to finally defeat the terrible creatures within. Meanwhile, time passed, and despite the loss of many Guardians and the loss of many of those that had followed Osiris, the city returned to strength. The Vanguard turned its attention away from the defenses of the city and back to what it had thought of before, the further reaches and expansion of its territory and borders, beyond its walls. It was at this point that the city began to hunt down the Ahamkara. The great dragons had granted wishes in the past. The Bargains had gained the city considerable power, but they needed great power in those times so desperately that no one had thought of the great price that was also asked. For every bargain came with a debt to be repaid in time, and so the Ahamkara themselves, being deemed too dangerous to coexist with the city, were hunted to extinction. The only remains to this day are the bones, which some graft to weapons or armor. It is said that the bones of the Ahamkara whisper to those that hold them, guiding them, sometimes to glory and sometimes to ruin. There are some rumors that out in the Jovian moons the Ahamkara still live. A few small outlying colonies perhaps, clinging on to life. But they are far removed from the care of the city now, which once again had grown to great strength, becoming a thriving metropolis, with many towers lining its walls and many defenders ready and willing to hold against any aggressor that might come their way.
If you don't know what's wrong, know where to go.
He grew in strength. It also became much less wise. Hubris was waiting in the wings for humanity's last bastion to grow bold again, and they began to expand their reach into the wilds further and further. It was a perfect time for yet another calamity. Eventually, it was decided that a time of great reclamation should begin, and so our city's consensus set its sights on the first giant leap that had brought humanity closer to the Traveler, closer into space. The city set its sights on Luna, our only moon. The moon, for the longest time, had been occupied by the armies of the Hive that had invaded it during the collapse. They had burrowed into its surface and made a massive lunar fortress. The consensus believed that a united host of Guardians could break the Hive's hold on the moon. Lord Shaxx knew better. He burst into the consensus chambers just before the final decision was made, but in spite of his protests, he was overruled. And so, the first great Guardian army united under the banner of the Cormorant Seal and marched on the moon. Their force met resistance from the armies of the Hive, who, united by a great champion wreathed in green flame, pushed back the Guardians at the Battle of Mare Imbrium. This great Hive champion was one of their lesser gods, an undefeatable monster that slaughtered hundreds of Guardians upon his blade, destroying their ghosts in the process, making each of their deaths true and final. A warlock of the Praxic Order known as Eriana III would learn from a captured Hive wizard that this champion was known as Crota, the Light Eater. With Guardian casualties rising on all fronts, the onslaught against the Hive was called off. Guardians fled the surface of the moon en masse, and the events at Mare Imbrium would be remembered in infamy by a simple name. It would be forever known to those who lived within the city as the Great Disaster. Eriana III was amongst the Guardians that fled the moon, and she was amongst those that had lost a friend in the battle. Her name was Wei Ning, a famous Titan that had died at Crota's very hands. She was everything that a Titan could aspire to be. Headstrong, strong in other ways too, for her fist was unbreakable. She had once claimed that if she met the darkness in personal combat, she would simply defeat it by beating its skull with her fist as well. But when faced with a true champion of the Hive, an immortal god, she was not strong enough to stand. Eriana III, having lost such a dear friend, was amongst those who immediately felt a burning desire for revenge. And so she gathered other Guardians who felt the same. 5 in total were brought to her side, and they set out to make an assault on the Hellmouth once again. With her were the Guardians Eris Morn, Omar Agar, Sai Mota, Vel Tarlo, and the exiled warlock master of Hive Arcana, Toland, the Shattered One. They ventured into the Hellmouth and made a final assault on Crota's forces, hoping to slay the God Prince once and for all. Unfortunately, the fire team was met with a great deal of opposition, and such an endeavor was doomed to failure from the start. Vel Tarlo, the lone Titan of the group, fell to the Darkblade and his army of Hive thrall. Sai Mota died at the hands of Omnigul, the will of Crota. Omar Agar was tortured to death by the heart of Crota, and his light was used to birth new generations of Hive thrall. Eriana III's last recorded logs came from the stills before the Netherrealm gates. It is perhaps possible that she made it through the keyhole into Crota's reality, where his true soul resided, before being snuffed out by Crota himself, who supposedly was unmoved by her light. And Toland, he did not die that day. Instead, his soul was torn from his body, which was destroyed by the Death Singer Yut. His presence would continue to float in the Nether Realms, guiding those who made an effort to resist the Hive, all the while floating between their dark Nether Realms, finding new power and knowledge along the way. Finally, there was only Eris Morn. Eris who had lost her ghost in the fighting. Eris who had lost her sight and clawed it back from those eyes of an acolyte. Eris who was the lone survivor of this ill-fated second fire team to assault the Hellmouth. She would survive in the darkness of its reaches for centuries,
before she would be found again and would return to the city. The city would never fully recover from the losses of the Great Disaster. The walls that the Titans maintained would no more be manned by thousands of Guardians. Now they were thinly posted, and the 8 towers that had been manned at the height of the city's power were reduced to but 1, and all around, the forces of the darkness began to close in. This persisted for what must have been centuries. The city was counting every day that it still stood. But then, one day, something happened. Your Guardian was reborn. In the lost mounds of corpses in the Cosmodrome of Old Russia, your ghost discovers you, and your rebirth occurs. Quickly you're assaulted by the fallen House of Devils, and your first initiative is to reclaim an old jump ship, just enough to reach the last safe city once again, returning to a home that you've never known, but a home that you will adopt nonetheless. When your ship is repaired, you head back to the Cosmodrome, killing Rixis, the Archon Rising of the House of Devils. He held within his possession a near-light-speed drive, thus something which could be used to upgrade your basic Arcadia jump ship into something that could now roam the stars. With such a great victory, you return home and speak with the Speaker himself. He told you of the terrible darkness that awaits outside the system, telling you of how the stories that children used to be told of the darkness and those terrible enemies are no longer being told at all, for fear that the children might be frightened. But now it makes no difference, because the children are frightened anyway. With this, you swore to fight the darkness and to push them back, no matter where you might find them or who they might be. You would fight for the city, for the light, and for the Traveler. You eventually returned to the Cosmodrome, discovering the Hive and their foul nests on Earth, and realized, in a separate instance, that the Fallen were attempting to access Rasputin, the last known Warmind to still be alive. You activated a hidden array on Old Russia's soil as well, unwittingly connecting Rasputin to all of the defense constructs across the system. Already in so little time, quite an exciting little adventure. But now was time to take on greater threats. The Prime Servitor of the House of Devils, Sepix Prime, had to be crippled, and in doing so you crippled the leadership of the House. Creating such a great blow meant that you had to set your sights on another territory. And so, discovering the Hive on Earth was a perfect reason for you to start venturing to the Moon. You arrived there to find the House of Exiles, a new group of Fallen that had no house and were simply rebels disbanded from other Fallen groups. We tracked the trail of a Fallen Guardian to a structure made by the Hive known as the Temple of Crota. And we got our first glimpse of the Exo-Stranger, the one with no time to explain, and yet one of the most important characters in our city's survival. We learned from the dead ghost we found within the Temple of Crota that the Hive were planning a massive invasion of Earth, and had been preparing for it for centuries, ever since they had infested the Moon. We ventured further into the depths of the Hellmouth, and discovered in the Hive Fortress the ancient archive of these aliens, known as the World's Grave. Through this, we uncovered the Hive's plans for the invasion of Earth, and more importantly, the fact that they had been making this plan for centuries, and that they had conquered thousands of worlds before ours. We heard about a legendary Hive sword next from the Cryptarchs, and find this lost sword in the depths of the Hellmouth once more. This is the sword that belonged to the Hive god Crota, the son of the Hive's taken king Oryx, who rules from afar. We used this sword and its dark power to slay the swarm princes found within the Hellmouth, before the blade itself shattered in our hands. We destroyed the shrine to Crota's father, the Hive god Oryx, and defeated its guardian, Sardok, his eye. Then, when we had dealt so much damage, peril had found us once more. The Speaker contacted us on an emergency channel, telling us and all other Guardians that were listening that the Hive were participating in a ritual to drain the Traveler of its light. With this, we assault the Hive's innermost depths of the Hellmouth once again, and this time, before we enter to the Temple of Crota, we heard a message from the Exo-Stranger. She told us through our comms to head to Venus to deal with a yet greater threat that rested somewhere within the Ishtar region. We still, however, entered the Hellmouth and defeated the wizards who were corrupting what turned out to be a shard of the Traveler, and using it to drain the light of the Traveler. Venus contained worse enemies than this somehow, and so we ventured forth, towards the sun, towards Venus and the Ishtar Sink, where for the first time we encountered the Vex, and learned from the Exo-Stranger in the Ishtar Academy of the Black Garden, where the Heart of Darkness resided, and the Traveler was being slowly wounded from. She told us that the location of the Black Garden could only be learned from the Reef-born Awoken, and so we would endeavor to head to the Reef and meet with the Awoken Queen, Mara Sov. She promised us in a bargain that we would be able to access the Black Garden with a key, and she would provide such a key if we could only bring her the head of a Vex Gate Lord. Following this search in the ancient ruins of the Academy, the Ishtar Collective Archives were found, and we prevented their knowledge and information from falling to the House of Winter, who is persistently a threat within the bounds of Venus. Here, we also learned for the first time of the Vault of Glass, that infamous place that had consumed so many Guardians. To prevent further assaults on Venus, we assailed the stronghold of the House of Winter, killing their Kel Draxis in the process. Returning to our investigation of the Vex, we discovered by analyzing a Vex mind core that the Vex themselves are beings of one mind that can travel through time in order to accomplish their objectives. We also discovered in the process how to draw out a Vex Gate Lord from their gate system, and with this knowledge we began our assault on the largest collection of Vex Gates in Venus's Ishtar Sink, a place known as the Endless Steps. We drew out a Gate Lord known as Zydron, and we killed it, taking his head to the Awoken, who reluctantly removed its eye. It turns out that the Gate Lord's eye would be our key into the Black Garden, and it turns out that it also needed to be charged. They told us then that the Black Garden could be found on Mars, in Meridian Bay. We arrive in such a place and find it occupied by yet a fourth race, the Cabal, who have a running war with the Vex there.
Amazon Music now includes audiobooks.
We make our way to the Black Garden Gate, realizing that we need to fight through the Cabal to make it into the Black Garden with this uncharged Gate Lord's eye. Next, we investigated the Vex below the city of Freehold and realized that they were in fact returning home, that the Black Garden was indeed the birthplace of the Vex themselves. We followed the Cabal into the reaches of the Dust Palace and discovered that Rasputin had indeed used the array that we had activated on Earth to worm his way into the cores of the Warmind of Mars. As our ghost would put it, Rasputin is everywhere now. Next, we decided to take the fight to the Cabal within their own warbase, but this was not a meaningless assault. Within the inner reaches of their base, the Cabal Blind Legion had contained a Vex Spire that would be capable of charging the Gate Lord's eye, allowing us entry into the Black Garden. With this, we also killed the Primus of the Blind Legion, dealing the Cabal efforts on Mars a serious blow. And finally, with a charged Gate Lord's eye, we took the fight to the Vex in the Black Garden, entering its folds and confronting the heart of the Black Garden, and a manifestation of the darkness itself that there was being worshipped by the Vex. They bound this immaterial object, this terrifying presence of the true darkness, into their own frames so that it could be corporeal and destroyable, but also so that they might drain its power. As a result, we destroyed the minds that had harbored this darkness, and in doing so, the Traveler was free to slowly heal. After confronting this threat, we returned to the city to find the Exo-Stranger waiting for us. She offered us her weapon as thanks, but more importantly warned us of the dark tidings that would be on the horizon. And so, unwilling to let these warnings go unheard or unanswered, we assembled a team and assaulted the Vex stronghold of the Vault of Glass. With the light of Kabir's shield that he had left behind, we were able to break the unbeatable shields of the Templar and Atheon that lay within. Such was the reality of the Vault, a terrifying testament to the full power of the Vex, who could bend time to their very will, erasing us from it if needs be, and yet we prevailed all the same. Guardians are able to shape their own fate, it would appear. Paracausality is not a trick of darkness alone. We, too, could bend the universe to our will. But darkness would soon test us. Eris Morn, who had lost herself for so many years in the harrowing passage of the Hellmouth's tunnels, would finally return. She heralded the arrival once again of a great threat the city had faced long ago, of Crota, the son of Oryx, telling us that we must face this terrible threat of the Hive, or we would be destroyed. Crota's forces had begun the invasion of Earth, and so our first directive was to kill the Fist of Crota, one of his commanders in the major theater of war that had erupted across Earth's cosmodrome. Finally, having killed him, the Hive that had remained were left leaderless and unorganized, but a new leader quickly emerged in the form of Omnigul, the will of Crota, the mother of his spawn. She took over and then decided that a new target had to be set. She attempted to take over, or at very least, defeat the defenses of Rasputin. His internal Warmind bunker was not defended by the same nuclear weapons of Armageddon that he held. This required us to enter his bunker, the Seraphim Vault, and push back the forces of Omnigul.
If you don't know what's wrong, know where to go. Bet.
By doing this, we banished not only the power of the will of Crota for but a time, but also destroyed Crota's might. Following up after this, we hunted down his eyes and his heart, and all those other appendages of him that reached into our reality. And finally, the hunt for Omnigul herself began. She who had escaped would finally be found and thwarted, as she attempted to breed a new brood under the Skywatcher's Jovian complex. And with her death, the Hive would learn a new fear. Finally, we headed to the moon, to find the soul of Crota himself. Within the Chamber of Night, we would discover this terrifying beast. We would destroy the crystal containing his soul, and thus prevent him from taking on a corporeal form within our reality. But Eris requested one last thing of us. We had yet another task. Crota had only been killed in a corporeal form. The crystal was not his end. To kill him truly, we had to venture into his netherworld. All Ascendant Hive have a form of pocket universe that their souls retreat into when badly wounded. It is within these netherverses that they can express their true power. They are most dangerous here. But also, if one is killed within their own netherrealm, they are dead forever. And so, Eris requested that we hunt down Crota's true form. By venturing into his Ascendant realm and seeking out his true form, we challenged Crota in the Sword Logic, the Hive's rule of unending slaughter in the universe. Using the combined might of our fire team and one of Crota's own blades, we sundered the God Prince of the Hive from existence once and for all. But with a terrifying scream that he let out in his final breath across the night, Crota called out, and the night would answer. It would take some time for that retribution to reach our shores, and since then, there had been other, smaller political movements that had cropped up. Skolas of the House of Wolves had previously been kept by the Queen of the Reef in the icy containment of a stasis pod in the Prison of Elders. She had since bargained him away to the Nine so that they might return some of her crows that had ventured into the Cauldron of Rhea. Skolas had been freed by the Nine, and was given a Ketch, one of the Fallen's great ships. He then used this newfound authority to incite rebellion amongst the fallen House of Wolves, forcing them to betray the Queen of the Reef, and then he set out to unite all the fallen houses under his one banner, led by Skolas, the self-appointed Kell of Kells. For this treachery of the fallen wolves and the sudden re-emergence of her great enemy Skolas the Rabid, Queen Mara Sov of the Awoken Reefborn promised to repay the debt of blood with as much suffering as she could offer Skolas. With this, she opened the borders of the reef to the guardians of the Last City, and told them all that if they wished great bounty, they should do no more than look to the reef, and it would be provided. We were summoned to the reef by Queen Mara Sov of the Awoken to repay the debt we owed for them aiding us in our infiltration of the Black Garden, and in order to repay her, we would need to aid her in the capture of Skolas, the newly appointed Kell of Kells. Firstly, we hunted him to the Ishtar Sink of Venus, where he escaped before we could capture him. He was, however, uniting both his house and the leaderless House of Winter in the process, and with them rallied to his banner, he had grown stronger. Next, we had to stop him from uniting any other houses, and so we headed to the Cosmodrome, attempting to stop Skolas' elite Silent Fang assassins from assimilating the House of Devils into their newly formed Kellship. These devils might have followed well enough if their leadership hadn't been spared by our action that day. We confronted the deadly assassins and won, killing a Fang commander in the process. And next, we hunted the command servitors of the wolves through the Cosmodrome, destroying them before cutting down the King Barons Paskin and Vekis, and the Wolf Baron Yavek, who were potentially breeding an alliance between the fallen House of Wolves and the House of Kings. To this day, it's worth noting that the Kell of the House of Kings has never been found. He is merely staying in the shadows, ruling like one of the Machiavellis of old. With no other fallen houses in the system that might bend the knee to him, Skolas was quickly running out of options. And so, we found him next, in the most unusual of places, in the weakened Vault of Glass that we had previously assaulted. We stopped him from tampering with Vex technology and bringing the systems of the Vault to his knees in the form of the oracles that might erase us from existence. But, most importantly, we realized that Skolas had gathered valuable information about Vex technology. And finally, we tracked him to the heights of the Vex Citadel, where he had scaled to the top. There we would find the fallen wolves' forces had been empowered by Vex technology. Skolas could now pull them through time to aid him, and so we battled through them, finally engaging the Kell of Kells in personal combat. And after he was subdued, the fallen was no longer at our mercy, but at the mercy of the Queen. Mara Sov captured him, and returned him to the reef so that he might languish once more within the Prison of Elders. She promised us great rewards when we returned, and we collected our rewards with the Queen's Guard, Petra. When captured, Skolas mentioned to the Queen and to Varix the Loyal, who still stood at the Queen's right hand, that he was afraid. Skolas was partly creating this new house as a way of more effectively shoring up the fallen in general, for he had seen something, a coming shadow on the horizon that he feared. This was an effective small hint for the Queen, and Queen Mara gifted Skolas to Varix as a result. Varix returned him to the Prison of Elders, but the Queen left to ponder this matter more, and what it might mean. The Prison of Elders was the fallen arena of combat that Varix had created. Those that wished to be tried would be tried by combat, and so we faced Skolas one last time in the trial of the Wolf Kell, and defeated him, once and for all. As this occurred, and as the bonds between the city and the Reefborn Awoken became stronger, Eris Morn found herself traveling to the reef. She met there with either Osiris or a representative of Osiris's cult. They met first with the Queen's cantankerous brother, and then with the Queen herself. She listened to their words, and all of them affirmed what they knew. The death of Crota, and his cry across the night, was being answered. They would need to prepare for what came next, for Crota's father would not take the death of his only son lightly. Oryx was coming, and Mara agreed on that day to fight the Hive, so that she might be able to give us a chance at defeating the Taken King. And so, with their fleets engaged, the Awoken would battle Oryx. His fleet would be mostly decimated, but so would the Queen in return. It is not known to this day whether the Queen lives or died that day, but what is known is this: Oryx had announced his presence in the system, and when he did so, he destroyed not only the Awoken fleet, but also...
Wyman gives me the best shine.
the Awoken fleet, but also brought to bear his most terrifying weapon. Oryx had the ability to abduct those that he saw as his enemies, even those he saw as his allies. With this, he could send them to a dimension where they would stand before the darkness. Their personality would be disseminated, and they would be corrupted and filled with darkness itself. Returning them in portals that he would create through his own will, Oryx could then summon these troops to battle for him. These would be known as the Taken, and they would be a scourge upon our system forevermore. But this was all before our intervention. We headed to a Cabal firebase on Phobos, one of the 2 moons of Mars. Initially, we were there to investigate an openly broadcast Cabal signal. This was of great concern to the Vanguard. It could be the prelude to war if they were willing to break transmission ciphers. But once we arrived, we discovered what could only be described as a slaughter-scape. Cabal were fleeing their base en masse. Ships had been shot down, the base itself was in ruins, and strange dark portals dotted its walls. And for the first time, we encountered not only a visage of Oryx, who told us that our infection would die, the light that he saw within us, but also we encountered for the first time his mysterious Taken. At this point, we had no choice. We left as fast as we could, fleeing from Phobos post-haste so that we might get further advice from the Vanguard. Eris Morn at this point took it upon herself to explain the doom that had been wrought by the Taken King, the fact that the city was in grave danger. But Cade, the Hunter Vanguard, was most certainly not going to take any of this lying down. He devised a plan and told us to take on the trail of a stealth drive that he had left in old Russia. We would mount this to Eris Morn's hive-covered ship, and would then use this to infiltrate the Dreadnought, Oryx's command ship, that would also be his Netherrealm, a paradox within our universe. We used the stealth drive to board the Dreadnought, knock out its weapon systems, and establish a transmat zone so other Guardians could land and invade. With our beachhead established, we began our hunt for Oryx, finding that the Cabal were assaulting a hive rupture. They had crashed one of their ships, the Dantalian Exodus 6, into the side of the Dreadnought, primarily so that they could destroy it, but also so they could hunt down Oryx and interrogate him. Oryx was not so easily captured, such was the hubris of the Cabal, and their commander, the Primus of the Skyburners, was taken by Oryx. We investigated the rupture that the Cabal had been assaulting for ourselves, but soon realized as we attempted to enter it, and thanks to Eris, that the only thing that could enter or will the ruptures to open was an Ascendant hive. Therefore, we needed some way to pass ourselves on as an Ascendant hive. As Eris said, become your enemy. Next, we returned to the moon, to the Chamber of Night that held Crota's soul. From this, we could take a shard from the crystal that had been used to transfer his essence between that of his sword realm and the physical universe, the very vessel that we had destroyed earlier. Barely escaping with our lives and a shard of the crystal, Oryx attempted to eradicate us once more. But our resolve was strong enough that even within the depths of the Hive Fortress, we found a way to escape. Next, we needed to head to Rasputin. The stealth drive that had been destroyed with Eris's ship was valuable, and the stealth code that Rasputin held was possibly one of the only things we could use to hide within Crota's realm. And here, we would indeed need to infiltrate, for we would need to imprison what remained of his soul within the crystal that held it. The crystal itself was left barren, and his soul was being prepared to move on in a death ceremony of sorts. We entered the Hellmouth once more with Rasputin's stealth codes, going straight to the stills, the darkness before the Oversoul throne. and there we allowed the crystal to drink deep from the essence of the Hive Prince of Nightmares. On our way out, once again we were ambushed, but thanks to the help of Eris we made it out unscathed. Finally, we returned to the Dreadnought with the soul of Crota in our grasp, and with this, the ruptures were opened, and we were allowed to pass as an Ascendant Hive. We entered the inner sanctum of the Dreadnought, finding our way to the altar of Oryx, who challenged us, telling us that darkness was liberation, and that by devouring our light we would be purer. Oryx fought us. But in the end, all of his power was naught. We defeated his physical form there at the altar, and in an act of desperation to save himself, Oryx took himself, transporting himself to a realm before the darkness. In doing so, he did irreparable damage and opened his throne world to be assaulted by our forces. This was unprecedented. This was the first time the Taken King in all of his majesty had truly been defeated by the light. He had even left his own sword behind, Willbreaker, the sword that drank the very essence of life. And Eris ventured to the altar of Oryx and claimed for herself a shard of Willbreaker. She made this available to us, and from this process of purification and crafting of Hadium, we forged the crystal into our own blades, so that we might battle Oryx in his realm. Finally, we made our assault on the Taken King in his own nether realm, found within his Dreadnought. Facing powerful Ascendant Hive, including the War Priest, Golgoroth and his two daughters, Ur-Anuk and Ur-Halak, we finally faced Oryx, the Taken King, First Navigator, Lord of Shapes, and ruler of the Osmium Throne. Blighted shadow of 1,000 graveyard worlds, and heir to the High Court of War. But even with all of his might and titles, even with all of those times that he made doxologies in praise of the darkness, was destroyed, and Oryx, his pure form, was finally defeated. His form floated towards Saturn, a crystalline giant husk that might fall eventually into that world that might never be seen again. Whilst many would try to take the place of Oryx in the hierarchy, such as Malok and Alak-Hul, we defeated them all too, thus keeping the Hive perpetually leaderless and disorganized. Never again would they be the threat that they had been in Sol. The actions of but a single Guardian had done all of the damage of the Great Disaster, and instead had wrought the Hive a terrible fate to suffer under other enemies. But we had not finished our business on the Dreadnought. We also killed in the process a pair of Cabal commanders who were attempting to detonate the Dreadnought's core. Upon defeating them, Dead Orbit traced a signal from the crashed Cabal ship within the Dreadnought's hull, the Dantalian Exodus 6. We traced back this signal to the ship and discovered after defeating many Taken and Cabal that the signal was being sent to the Cabal Empire, more specifically, to the leader of the Cabal Empire. This was a threat that we would have to answer at some point soon, but there were other menaces lurking on the horizon. The Fallen had come back into resurgence. The force of the House of Devils had made its way into the Cosmodrome once more, but more specifically, into a sector of the Cosmodrome that had been dark for decades, a sector known as the Plague Lands. Lord Saladin at this left his post at the Iron Banner, the tournament within the Crucible that for a long time had trained Guardians, and then took charge of the situation personally, much to the bewilderment of Guardians in the tower. At Saladin's request, we personally scaled Felwinter Peak and defended it from a retooled Sepix Prime, Sepix that had been resurrected and appeared to have been augmented with some kind of unfamiliar technology. For some reason, this great mechanical construct was capable of regeneration. We destroyed Sepix Prime once again, but with such regenerative power, it quickly retreated. And so, Saladin instructed us to pursue it back to the Cosmodrome. But before doing so, we entered the Iron Temple for the first time. Saladin had not ventured here for long, long periods of time himself, and so the honor was given to us. The Iron Lords were returning, and to signal this to the world, the braziers atop Felwinter Peak, by us, were lit once more. We arrived finally in the Cosmodrome and encountered fallen forces in great numbers. Nevertheless, we pushed through and gathered what data we could from a sensor grid near the entrance of this new area of the Cosmodrome. This was a strange instance, as it had been almost completely consumed by the same technology that covered Sepix. The Fallen responded to this invasion, coming from an entrance to a new area of the Cosmodrome. This area was the Plague Lands, and it had been locked away by the Iron Lords after their final assault had been made on the Siva replication chamber during the early City Age. From the Plague Lands, as we were downloading what remained of the archives, augmented Fallen assaulted our position. They had been covered in the new technology that had graced Sepix, the one that had also graced the sensor grid we were trying to salvage. They turned themselves into cyborgs with this powerful newfound substance. The substance that was the nanotechnology that had destroyed the Iron Lords, that we call Siva. Next, after discovering such a terrible fate had befallen the Iron Lords and the Fallen, we went into the Plague Lands, destroying a fallen stronghold there. We discovered that Siva had even resurrected the guns of the Golden Age that had fallen during the collapse. After taking down those guns, Shiro IV, the Vanguard scout assigned to Saladin and the Iron Temple, reinforced our beachhead that we had created by destroying these guns. And all the while, Lord Saladin told us to meet him back at the Iron Temple so he could tell us the story of the Iron Lords and how they fell to Siva. Saladin told us this tale with great pain. He told us of how they failed to truly destroy the Siva replication chamber within the Plague Lands, in spite of Yolda's detonation. With this, the task now falls to us to destroy this threat once and for all. After recounting the tale of the Iron Lords, we're told to seek out the Cryptarch Tyra Khan and her advice on the nature of Siva, and she pointed us to the Golden Age labs of its creation, on Mars, under Clovis Bray's roof in the Dust Palace. And so there we went, finding out more about Siva and that the Fallen had in fact learnt of the substance there, and had known to unleash it within the Cosmodrome because of such research. Finally, we headed back to the Plague Lands to destroy Siva once and for all. Having established that the Devils had a limited control over Siva, we overloaded their systems within the reactor that they had maintained, breaking their defenses and giving us a much-needed chance to get into the Siva replication chamber that they had built their Archon's fortress around. This replication chamber was where the Iron Lords fought Siva, and it was also where we would find their tomb. There we found that Siva had done something far more horrifying than simply create cyborg Fallen. The unrestrained Siva within the chamber that had survived had taken the bodies and light and presence of those Iron Lords and had augmented and corrupted them. We faced Siva Iron Lords, vile creatures that had been corrupted by Siva's influence, light forced to fight our light, and yet unable to stop themselves due to Siva's nanotechnology and its influence. Their bodies, their armor, and their weapons had been twisted to the will of Rasputin, whose final order had not simply been to immunize, but now was a new directive: consume, enhance, replicate. But this great technology of the Golden Age was not enough to compare to our light. And so we slew the terrifying forms of the reanimated Gellion, Felwinter, and Yolda. We destroyed the Siva replicator and recovered Yolda's helm. Upon presenting it to Saladin, we proved ourselves worthy of an honor that none before us would know. We would be the first of a new generation of Iron Lords, our title put to great use, our honor and legacy born anew. And so our job was now extended. No longer were we simply a Guardian, we were a Lord Guardian. And after reforging a Yalahorn with Siva and other technologies at our disposal, our job became clear. The House of Devils had been stopped from creating more Siva, but this did not stop them from using that which they already had at their disposal. The House of Devils was on the move. Axis, the new Archon Prime of the Fallen Devils, had made a call to all Fallen across the system. He told them to turn themselves to the Perfection Complex in Old Russia, where he resided. He offered them cybernetic augmentations, which to the Fallen is akin to becoming a demigod, for they wish to ascend into machines. We assaulted this new stronghold of the House of Devils and destroyed the Archon Prime once and for all, so that he would never be able to unite those millions of Fallen still across our system and to begin a new assault on the city that would surely spell our doom. And now, with this moment of brief peace, began the Age of Triumph. The last age of the city. We had faced all the threats that we had seen. We had seen peace in our time. The children who had once been told of the darkness, and were afraid regardless of the stories no longer told, they were no longer afraid. They had heard our heroic deeds done, and they wished to imitate them. Pretending to be guardians, they were no longer living in fear. But even with this, darkness still loomed on the horizon. A darkness that we could not predict. A darkness that once again we would be weak to in our hubris. The Fallen had shown signals of retreat. In the Cosmodrome, during a routine scouting run, the FOTC, the forces of the city, discovered that Fallen had retreated en masse and had piled all of their armor and heraldic flags in mass.
Amazon Music now includes audio.
Armor and heraldic flags in massive pyres and set them ablaze. The Fallen's retreat signaled the end of the 100-year siege that surrounded the city, which ordinarily would be a point of great joy. But in reality it was an omen of the coming war. And finally, we had the state the city was in now. You as an exalted guardian of the city, a Lord Guardian of the Iron Lords, the guardian who had slain Oryx, the Taken King, one of the darkest threats we had known, the one who had found justice for Ariana and Toland and Vel and Omar and Sai and Eris, the one who had defeated the Vex within the Vault of Glass, and the one who had slain the Kell of Kells. And at your side always were the 3 Vanguard mentors, Ikora Ray of the Warlocks, Commander Zavala of the Titans, and Cade Six of the Hunters. But finally, on one fateful stormy night in the tower, the danger of the situation at present would be finally revealed, and our new enemy would at last unmask themselves.
Ikora, if you tell me this is a practical joke, well, it kills me to say it, but I would be really impressed.
Impressing you, Cade, is the easiest thing I'll do all day.
Let's get serious, people.
Zavala, this is my serious face. Can't you tell?
Ikora, what have you got?
Someone or something has sabotaged the Skyline defense systems.
And comms have been spotty for the last few hours. Every sensor beyond the wall has gone dark.
Maybe it's just the storm. Maybe it's... What do the set feeds tell us?
Nothing.
Well, that's good, right?
No. I mean, they're not there. There are no satellites.
And that's not good.
Battle stations! one with me! Now!
Hang on!
Of course, this is not the full history of Destiny. We haven't got into ancient history, we haven't touched the story of the Thorn and the Last Word, we've barely touched the Ishtar Collective and their experiments on the Vex. We have not even seen the full events of the Reef Wars, or whatever the Nine end up being. And as for the Exo Stranger, well, I suppose we will know in time, but your guess right now is as good as mine. In the meantime, though, I want you all to go ahead and support this channel if you can. If you found this informative or enjoyed it in any way, then your support is very much appreciated, and you can do so in one of a few ways. Of course, there are the typical YouTube things, such as liking this video, or simply subscribing to the channel, or turning email notifications on so that you never miss my content. But on top of that, there are other things that you can do. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions. I will try my best to answer some of them. And if you really enjoyed this lore video and you're considering supporting more projects like those that you saw which were animated within this video, then you can support my Patreon. Patreon.com is something that helps me create these higher quality lore projects, and they do